Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to this session. One second. Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to this session. One second. Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to this session. Okay, so let's continue with today's class. Let me just mute this. I hope I am audible. If you have any audio issues, please let me know. So today we are continuing with the lecture 4 of UPSC CSE Modern India NCERT Old History textbook. Okay, we have so far completed 3 of them. The 3 lectures has been so far completed. This is the 4th one. Okay. So good evening to one and all, and let's begin. So today we are going to start from chapter 5. We will be looking into chapter 6 and 7 as well, and we will be completing everything up to the revolt of 1857. Okay, so the next session, whenever that is, will start from 1857 revolt and we will move onwards. Okay, so chapter 5 deals with the structure of the government and the economic policies of British Empire in India from 1757 to 1857. So I hope you remember what happened in 1757. Why is this year important in the history of India? 1757. It is important because of the Battle of Plassey. So since the Battle of Plassey till the revolt of 1857, over that 100 years, what was the kind of policy that the British took on India or the East India Company implemented in India? Okay, so let's start. So English East India Company came to India in 1600s and established their factory in India, and slowly and steadily they started transforming from a merely trading company into somebody who is more into politics. They started to establish factories in all parts of India. They started to acquire Diwani rights, Nizamat rights, etc., etc. Finally they started to conquer territories and started to be one of the major powers in India against the Indian royal princes and other clans such as Marathas, Punjab, the Sikhs, etc., etc. All of them were routed out, and finally English East India Company became the supreme power in India. Up to here we saw in the last class. Okay, we saw how they established their might over the Marathas, over the Mysore, Tipu Sultan, Hyder Ali, etc., etc. How they managed to defeat the Sikhs of Punjab after the death of Ranjit Singh, so and so. Anyway, finally British had a very large empire in India, especially towards the main Indian subcontinent, and they wanted to find a suitable method of government. Okay, India is a very diverse land. It is not easy to rule India using a single a one size fits all policy. That's not possible. Okay, maybe Britain is not as diverse as India, so they could have that kind of a common kind of law or common kind of rules and regulations. But that is not possible in India. India is a land of diversity for a majority of reasons, and so British were also looking into the various ways on how to rule India. Okay, but even now the main objective of the company is to increase the company's profits. Okay, they are here and they got the administrative power of the entire Indian territory, but the thing is still they are a trading company. Their first priority is trade and profit. Okay, it's not ruling India or enhancing India's capabilities, etc., etc. They wanted to create profits. They have to enhance the profitability of Indian possessions to Britain, not for Indians. They are not doing all this not for Indians but to increase the profit for Britain, to maintain and strengthen the British hold over India. So these are their chief chief targets at this point of time. Okay, they are not at all concerned about India. They are not at all concerned about governance. If they are at all concerned about governance, it is for making sure that they grab more and more profit. They start to enhance their trade. Okay, so in order to have a good trade relationship, in order to make that kind of profit, The most important thing is to maintain law and order. Correct? If the country is torn with wars and robberies and dacoities, it is impossible for anybody to conduct peaceful trade. Correct, right? If their country is peaceful and prosperous, then the trade will be also flourishing. Otherwise, it won't be happening in a reasonable level at all. British also knew this. So their intention was to make sure that they bring some kind of stability and establish law and order throughout the territory of India. For this purpose, they started by establishing a kind of government. Okay, the first form of government that came was in Bengal, and you have already learned about this, the dual government. I have talked about this in the last class to a great extent. The dual government established in Bengal, whereby there were two centers of power. One is the Indian power center, that is the Nizam, and the second is the British. Okay, so Nizam had all the responsibility without any kind of actual power, and British had all the power without any kind of actual responsibility. So this was the dual system established in Bengal in around 1765. But this did not last for a very long time. It was rolled back in 1772 itself. Okay, but around this time also we can still see that East India Company is only a commercial body. The higher authorities there, the people who actually controlled everything were back in Britain. So imagine at those times we do not have air travel or any kind of fast means of communication at all. So a decision that has to be made in India has to come all the way from Britain, that is like 6,000 miles away. Okay, that took months before it came to India. So everything was a kind of mess. Those decisions that had to be taken very quickly had to be paused for a very long time because of the lack of quicker communication systems. Okay, so the company's English servants took advantage of this situation. Okay, I mean, before their superiors can do anything, or even if their superiors want to do something, it will take a long time. So in the meantime, the servants in the company took advantage of this situation to do illegal trade, to engage in corrupt means to increase their own private profits, etc., etc. So what happened? The servants of the company started to earn a lot. Okay, their wages were actually, the real wages or salaries were actually very low, but through the private trade, they began to become extremely rich. And people were not happy about this in Britain. Okay, British people were very jealous of the company's servants, and they wanted to, fix this situation. Company was actually monopolizing the trade all over. Okay, other British personals or other British companies were not allowed to trade to east of Cape of Good Hope because of that Queen's Charter. I hope you remember all these things. I have already explained this in my previous sessions. Okay, so anyway, British people started to object to the methods and means by which English East India Company was and its personnel were gaining more and more profit. They wanted to end the company's monopoly. Alright, so what did they do? They started to petition, they started to protest, etc., etc., to the British Parliament. But the company was able to maintain its hold even at this level because they managed to bribe even the Crown of Britain. Okay, the company was so good that so rich that they could even bribe the English king, including and the other ministers in the parliament, etc., etc. Okay, but anyway, some of the ministers of the parliament too were on the side of the other companies and other private merchants who wanted to trade with the East. Okay, and an ample opportunity came along very soon. So what happened was, despite this flourishing trade happening, despite this company servants becoming extremely rich, the company actually became close to bankrupt. Okay, their profits were negligible and they were actually on the losing side. They came to the verge of collapse that at one point, they had to raise a loan they requested a loan from the British government equaling to an amount of £1 million. Okay, a company who was making flourishing trade, a company whose servants are basically super rich, has actually requested for a loan of £1 million from the British Parliament or from the British government. What does this mean? This means that there is something inherently wrong with the company. Correct? If the company was making huge profits, why would they request these kinds of loan to stay alive? So when officials looked into this, they understood that the company is not doing well, the servants are doing well. Okay, the servants are doing the private trade, engaging in corrupt means, etc., etc., and they are doing well, but the company is not doing so well. Okay, so at this time, British government agreed to grant this loan upon certain conditions, and these conditions were amalgamated into the Regulating Act of 1773. This is the first time the British government actually intervenes into the English East India Company through an act, the Regulating Act of 1773. Okay, so you have to study this Regulating Act in detail. You can read the important points from your textbook. I have only given the points which are given in the NCERT textbook. There are some additional points also. Please read that from Spectrum or say any other textbook. Even in the Lakshmikant textbook, it is given as points itself. You can read it there. Okay, so some of the important things that happened as a part of this Regulating Act was that changes in constitution of Court of Directors of the company and subjected their actions to the supervision of British government. The Court of Directors was the body which was actually controlling English East India Company. Okay, taking all the decisions for the company. So their actions were now brought responsible to the English government. Okay, so they cannot do whatever they want now. The British government has some kind of control over the company's activities. Similarly, directors were to lay before the ministry all correspondence dealing with civil, military affairs and revenue of India. Okay, until now they could do whatever they want, but from now onwards, all these civil activities, military activities and the revenue activities that they undertake in India has to be informed or put down before the British authorities. Alright, Government of Bengal was to be carried by a Governor General and his council, who were given this power to superintend and control Bombay and Madras presidencies in matters of war and peace. So we see the establishment of something called a Governor General, a post called Governor General. This is not the Governor General of India. Okay, don't confuse this. Governor General came first, and later we will see that this Governor General of Bengal becomes the Governor General of India. That post was given later, not here. Okay, so anyway, a Governor General and his council was established to look into the affairs of Bengal and Bombay and Madras presidencies in certain matters such as war and peace, etc. Provided for the establishment of a Supreme Court of Justice in Calcutta to administer justice for Europeans, their employees and the citizens of Calcutta. Okay, the Supreme Court, this Supreme Court is not something as we see today. Today the Supreme Court of India has jurisdiction all over India. This Supreme Court is specifically looking into Europeans, the employees of the East India Company and the citizens of Calcutta. These are some of the features of Regulating Act of 1773. There are plenty more. Please read that from Lakshmikant textbook or Spectrum textbook. Okay, or I will take it when I take those textbooks in the future. Alright, moving on. Problem was, even this act was not enough. Okay, Regulating Act was not enough to bring everything into a smooth existence. Okay, the Governor General was at the mercy of his own council. Okay, if the council had like 3 members and there is Governor General, so totally 4 members. If the other 3 members take a decision together, then they can actually suppress the decision taken by the Governor General. Okay, so Governor General was basically at the mercy of his own council. This was a major drawback to this act. So British government couldn't exert as much influence as they would like, because this Governor General do not have that kind of power over his own council. Okay, so there were some drawbacks to this Regulating Act which had to be fixed. So the first person whom came to India as the Governor General according to the Regulating Act of 1773 was Warren Hastings. Okay, Warren Hastings became the first Governor General under this act. Alright, this act failed in multiple fields. Okay, this act failed to resolve the conflict between the company and its opponents in England. Okay, basically this act was implemented for what? To make sure that East India Company had some kind of, the British government had some kind of control over English East India Company, thereby also trying to, smoothen the protest that is going on against this company back in England. That was the idea, but it did not help in that matter at all. Okay, there because of the various drawbacks I just mentioned. So in order to fix all the issues associated with the Regulating Act of 1773, later in 1784, Pitt's India Act was passed. Another major landmark in the history of India, the Pitt's India Act of 1784, which actually established something called a Board of Control. Okay, Board of Control. Now we will see a dual setup. We have a Court of Directors which looks into the commercial activities of the company, and a Board of Control which looks into the administrative aspects of the company. So Pitt's India Act established the Board of Control. Okay, and this act gave the British government supreme control over the company's affairs and its administration in India. So we will see that gradually British government takes over the company. Company's positions in India. Okay, from this act onwards, all the achievements of the company in India will hence be called as the British possessions. Okay, the territories of Britain, not the territories of English East India Company. Clear? So Pitt India Act was a major step towards British government directly taking control over the English East India Company's activities in India. Later on, we will see that by 1858, by the Queen's Proclamation, okay, the entire East India Company loses its administrative powers in India, and British government will directly take control over the Indian affairs. Okay, until then we will see that gradually company is becoming more and more weak, and government is becoming more and more authoritative. Okay, so what are the main features of Pitt's India Act? The most important one, in establishment of Board of Control, I have already mentioned. Some of the other important things that happened is the establishment of 6 commissioners for the affairs of India, popularly known as the Board of Control, including 2 cabinet ministers. Okay, BOC actually had 6 commissioners, and out of these 6, 2 were cabinet ministers. Cabinet ministers means the highest ranked ministers in British Parliament. Okay, this act placed the government of India in the hands of Governor General and a council of 3. In a way that if the Governor General could get the support of even one of the other 3, then he could have his way. Okay, earlier what was the arrangement? If other 3 went against the Governor General, he couldn't do anything. Okay, even if it was like 50-50, still it is an impasse. But now Governor General had more power that if at least he could get one other member to support him, he could have his way in administering India. So that was the new setup. So Governor General became a bit more powerful. Similarly, the Bombay and Madras presidencies were subordinated to the Bengal presidency in all questions of war, diplomacy and revenue. Earlier, Governor General had some kind of power to establish war and peace. But now it is both the presidencies, Bombay and Madras presidencies, are clearly subordinated to Bengal in all questions of war, diplomacy and revenue. Okay, so now the Governor General is kind of the supreme power in India along with his council. So in 1786, as a next step, Governor General was given the authority to overrule his council of ministers in matters of importance affecting safety, peace or interests of the empire in India. So gradually the power of Governor General kept on increasing. Okay, by 1786, after 2 years of passing Pitt's India Act, the Governor General now has the authority to overrule his own council. Okay, remember at the beginning, the 3 council members could together, eclipse the Governor General, and later by the Pitt's India Act, Governor General, if he can manage to, get the support of at least one member, he can have his own way. And now by 1786, Governor General had the power to overrule the entire council at will. Clear? And then the Charter Act of 1813, another major landmark in Indian history. You have to study Charter Act of 1813, 33, 53, etc. in detail, in depth. Okay, but the entire provisions of those acts are not given in the NCERT old textbook. Please read that from Spectrum or Dipen Chandra sir's textbook. Okay, please do look into that. Anyway, Charter Act of 1813 the most important factor or the most important point here is that the trade monopoly of the company in India was ended. Okay, through this act, the trade monopoly of the company in India was ended, but trade in tea and trade with China was still exclusive to the company. Okay, in general, all other avenues of trade was open to others. The monopoly of East India Company was ended, but still East India Company had the monopoly over tea as well as trade with China. This too came to an end by the Charter Act of 1833. Okay, by the Charter Act of 1833, even the remaining monopolies of East India Company came to an end. The debts of the company were taken over by the Government of India, which was also to pay its shareholders a 10% dividend on their capital. So basically, the company has started to decline a lot in terms of power, and the Government of India and hence the Government of Britain started to have a major role in maintaining the affairs of India. Okay, there are plenty of other points in both these acts. Please read that. It is also given in your Lakshmikant textbook as points itself. So you can even memorize them. Okay, it's very important. So do even you can try to memorize all these points. Okay. So despite all these acts, okay, we have implemented lots and lots of acts for administering India. But problem is that still we do not have an effective means of communication that can curtail the delay between the communication from India and Britain. Still, it took a long time, for the communication to happen. Okay. Besides, the day-to-day administration of India cannot be run from Britain, which is something like 6,000 miles away. So, the authority who should run Indian administration should be in India. Okay, and this realization made the Governor General the supreme power in India. Okay, so this is how the idea of Governor General became the final word in India. The supreme authority in India was delegated to the Governor General in Council, and the Governor General having the authority to rule, overrule his council in important questions. This was the main factor based on which Governor General became so much powerful. Later on, we will see that this person acts as Viceroy also, as a representative of the Crown. Similarly, a Secretary of State also comes into play very later, after the revolt of 1857 and all. And Secretary of State is mostly residing in Britain only, but still, by that time we have telegraph, etc., so that the communication is much more quicker. Clear? So by that time, this delay between England and India is reduced to a huge extent. So we can have powers from England controlling India. But for now, we cannot afford to have that kind of delay. So Governor General has been given all these powers. Clear? So Indians were allowed no share in their own administration. This is a very important feature throughout, British administration in India for a very long time, until the national movement actually starts. Okay, until say for a very long time, until for another century, we do not see any adequate representation of Indians in running the administration of India. It was all a British show. Okay, why? Because the chief aim of British was to enable them to exploit India economically to the maximum advantage of various British interests. That's it. Okay, I mean, how can you have an Indian member in your administration and ask him to exploit his own countrymen? That is the question. Okay, I mean, you can ask a British personnel, to exploit India and gain more profit for Britain. I mean, he will do it out for his love for his own country. But you cannot ask to do the same to an Indian, na? I mean, you can't ask him to exploit his own country for the benefit of someone else. So for this purpose, and some other reasons, like say some of the Governor Generals were of the opinion that Indians were inferior to Britishers or Europeans in general. Okay, and some due to all these factors, in general, Indians were never allowed a share in their own administration for a very long time. Okay, so from 1600 to 1757, basically East India Company was a trading corporation. I already explained this at the beginning. They were merely a trading company. British manufacturers were extremely jealous of the popularity of Indian textiles that it enjoyed in Britain. In the previous class, I have explained regarding this. Indian textiles, especially the cotton textiles of India, were hugely popular in Britain. It were called the calicos. Okay, it were huge. It was so popular that the British textile industry began to collapse. Okay, and this sent panic waves to all the manufacturers or the textile manufacturers in Britain. So what did they do? They organized themselves together and started to protest against this kind of heavy imports into Britain. So they started to put pressure on the government, and finally by 1720 they managed to pass a law forbidding the wearing and using of dyed cotton cloth from India. Okay, the British textile industry was on the verge of collapse. I mean, they were suffering the brunt of this much import from India, that in order to protect themselves, they finally pressured the British government into passing a law based on which wearing or using a dyed cotton cloth from India was punishable under law. Okay, also heavy duties were imposed on the import of plain cloth. Okay, huge duties. So even now some various governments employ these kinds of techniques to save their home industries. Now we impose anti-dumping duty, we impose certain heavy customs duties, etc., to safeguard our own domestic production, etc. So similar step was taken back then by England also. Problem was that this was not reciprocated in India. Okay, later we will see that during Industrial Revolution this happens the other way around. The English will start to dump goods into India, and at that time we were not able to increase the import duty. Why? Because we are not ruling. If Indians were ruling India at that time, we could have prevented British from dumping their goods into India. But since British themselves are ruling India, they allowed that kind of free trade, and they started to dump lots and lots of goods into finished products into India, and basically ruined the Indian industries. Okay, but anyway, for now the cotton cloth was basically prevented from entering into Britain in huge quantities. Similarly, Indian silk and cotton textiles still held their own in foreign markets. Okay, even after all these things, Indian textile industry was still very much popular at international levels. Okay, but very soon Industrial Revolution is about to happen in England and other European nations, and we will see an entire reversal of what have been said so far. One second. Okay, no comments so far. If you have any questions, please put it in the live chat. Okay. Anyway, all this started back in 1757. Okay, in 1600 the company came to India, but they actually got the administrative powers all to themselves since the Battle of Plassey, which happened in 1757. Okay, this battle officially gained the political control of Bengal to Britain. Okay, I mean East India Company. East India Company now got the political control over one of the richest provinces in India, that is Bengal. And from this point onwards, we will also see that the company manages to acquire the revenue of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, and they started to use the revenue they collected from these provinces to pay for their expenses in India. Okay, until this point what happened? They had to pay for their Indian expenditure using the money which they brought from Britain. Clear? So British money comes to India and the Indian goods goes to Britain. So this is a fair trade. But after 1757, what happens? They got the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. So that happens after the Battle of Buxar. Okay, after the Battle of 1757, they got the revenue of Bengal, and with this revenue, they started to pay for their expenditures. So nothing is coming to India, but everything is going out of India. Okay, they are buying cotton clothes and exporting it to Britain. So goods are going out of India, but they are paying with the money from India itself. So British money is not coming to India. So it is a one-way trade. So from here onwards, we see the beginning of the drain. Company eliminated its rival traders, both Indian and foreign, and prevented them from offering high wages to Bengal craftsmen. So step by step, the company started to take control over the textile industry. So in order to do that, what did they do? They actually made these Indian Bengali handicraftsmen to sign contracts, etc., based on which they will not create products for anybody else. Okay, they will create products only for the British company. Similarly, British company started to give money in advance to these craftsmen on the condition that they will use this money to produce products for the company and no one else. Clear? So they started to change the system of economy in India to suit for their own methods. So what happened? What happened is very simple. The weavers lost both their ways as buyers as well as seller. So the weavers cannot sell their product to anyone else. They have to sell to Britain. Similarly, they have to make do of whatever money the British give them. They cannot ask for a higher rate or anything. They have to be content with whatever the British gives them, and they have to give the product only to the British. Clear? So the Indian handicraft industry started to suffer. To cap all these things, Industrial Revolution happened in Britain. So when Industrial Revolution happened in Britain, what happened? The British overseas trade had been expanding rapidly in the previous centuries. Britain had come to capture and monopolize many of the foreign markets by means of war and colonialism. This is a story that you already know. Okay, when the Industrial Revolution started in Britain, it went on to a huge success because English had access to plenty of raw materials and had a lot of wealth from their colonies. Okay, if Industrial Revolution had happened without Britain acquiring any kind of these colonies, then it may not have been such a success. Why? Because they do not have enough wealth to invest into the Industrial Revolution. But since Britishers managed to establish colonies all over the world, not just in India, but in Latin American regions, etc., etc., they had Africa and so on. They had huge wealth amassed from their colonies, which they could put into the Industrial Revolution. Clear? So colonization actually enhanced the effects of Industrial Revolution. So they were able to acquire sufficient capital as an investment into the new machinery and the factory system, which were the outputs of Industrial Revolution. This capital was concentrated not in the hands of feudal class but in the hands of merchants and industrialists. This is a very important thing. In Britain, there is a kind of class, the aristocracy, which is named as feudal class. Okay, the feudatories. If these extra income were concentrated in their hands, they would simply use it for a luxurious living, or to become more and more wealthy by themselves for selfish personal needs and all. But this colonization, this trade, etc., etc., changed the dynamics of British society. Rather than the aristocracy or rather than the feudal classes becoming more and more wealthy, it was actually the merchants and industrialists who reaped the benefits of having colonies and trade with other parts of the world. Okay, so what did these people do? They did not use this money to increase their personal wealth. They actually invested in something else to gain even more profits. Okay, so they put their money into Industrial Revolution, to invention of new machines, establishment of factories, so and so. Apart from this, another interesting factor that contributed to the Industrial Revolution or the success of Industrial Revolution is the rapid increase of population. Okay, during those times, the population is comparatively low, and the population in Britain is very low. Okay, not such as that we have in India, but comparatively pretty low. But around this time, during the Industrial Revolution, or around those times, the population started to increase. So there are two important outcomes of population increase, which are they? One is that Britain can get lots and lots of manual labor. Okay, because if there is more population, which it means that more and more jobs has to be produced. So Industrial Revolution is producing jobs, and now the manual labor can be made available because of the population increase. That is one thing. Another thing is that the output of the industrial products, okay, the finished goods, somebody has to use it. Correct? You can produce goods as much as you want, but if there is no demand for that good, then it is a waste. Correct? Nobody will make any profits. Because of this population increase, the demand also kept on increasing. The more the population, the more you need the clothes, more food items, more luxury items, etc., etc., right? So demand also kept on increasing. So population growth or the rapid increase in population actually helped the industrial revolution. Similarly, specific inventions and developments such as those inventions by Hargreaves, Watt, Crompton, Cartwright, and many others, Davies, okay, all these personalities, scientists, okay, these inventors actually brought in new and new articles. Okay, they invented telegraph, telephone, say spinning jenny, okay, and other new weaving techniques, steam engine. All these revolutionized the field of science and technology. And you have to you have to understand a very important point here, that all this enhancement happened in Britain and nothing happened in India at that time. This is why India started to lag behind a lot compared to European nations. A very important point written in this last paragraph. It says that until the beginning of 19th century, more or less, the standards of living across the globe was same. Okay, standard of living in India, standard of living in Britain, US, all these were the same. But after the Industrial Revolution, what happened is the quality of life in Western nations, Europe, USA, etc., started to go up, while those in the Asian nations either were stagnant or went downwards. Okay, why? Because Industrial Revolution never happened in the Eastern nations until very late. It was only after independence that India have accelerated its industrial growth. Same goes for Japan, China. But right now we can see Japan is one of the way ahead of in industrialization, one of the best industrialized nations in the world. But in India it was comparatively a slower progress. Okay, but the point is, until Industrial Revolution, quality of life or the living standards across the world was the same, but after the Industrial Revolution, it began to favor the Western nations. The Eastern nations actually lagged behind or say went down. Okay, so Britain became increasingly urbanized. Obviously, Industrial Revolution is happening, lots of capital is coming in, lots of money, expenditure, output, products. Okay, so overall the quality of life increased, urbanization happened. So when urbanization happened, what will happen? Something else also will happen parallelly. That is, more and more people coming from rural areas into the urban areas in search of job. That is that will always happen in parallel to urbanization. You can see, say in India today, say take a typical city, say for example Delhi or Mumbai. Okay, this is a very urbanized area, Mumbai and Delhi, and people from outskirts of these cities or say adjacent cities all will come to Mumbai or Delhi for work. You have seen that, right? I mean, if you look at the state of the subways in Delhi and Mumbai, similarly, it's full of passengers coming to work from long distances at the morning and going back to their homes at the evening. Clear? So this kind of mass migration happens in a large scale whenever urbanization takes place at that pace. So here also, in Britain also, something similar happened. When urbanization happened, people began to migrate into these towns and started to live their life near factories. Okay, this led to the emergence of two new classes of people. Okay, two entirely new classes of society were born. One is the industrialized capitalists and the who own the factories, etc., etc., and the other is the workers who hired out of their own out their labor on daily wage. So two classes of people emerged. One is the industrial capitals who own the factories, etc., and then the workers or the laborers who conduct their job in these factories. So emergence of middle class is also an output of industrial revolution. So they form the middle class. Okay, eventually the industrial capitalists will become the rich class and the workers will become comparatively poorer, but still better than the agriculturists. So this is how middle class is born in the West. Okay, and this middle class will be eventually born in India and other Eastern nations also during the time of national movement and etc. Okay, So when such a huge kind of migration happens into industrialized towns, you need adequate facilities to accommodate them. Correct? I mean, you have to have houses to give them shelter. You need that kind of drainage system. You need well and sophisticated network of say food articles, water, and all other amenities. Correct? Problem was that this did not happen in Britain. The pace of urbanization or pace of this migration was so high, was very high, that eventually the living conditions of these people who are coming to urban towns began to deteriorate. Instead of having good luxurious life, they have to live in life of slums. The rising of slums is actually something that happened along with industrial revolution because of the lack of proper planning. So plenty of slums started to come up. So the hygienic situation in slum is very pathetic. You all know that. So the more and more diseases and infectious diseases, etc., started to spread, and all this was a mess. It was not at all properly planned. So this was a huge drawback of the lack of foresight of industrial revolution. Similarly, workers work in factories were supposed to do their work for very long hours. Sometimes a work day will go for like 14 to 16 hours per day. Wages were extremely less. Women and children had to work equally hard. Even children who are like 5 years or 7 years of age had to work long shifts in factories. So basically, we have no unions or anything right now. We do not have any kind of trade, factory regulations at this point. Everything was focusing on making profit. It doesn't matter if you are young or old or woman or man, doesn't matter. You are employed in the factory to maximize the output. So it was basically a race to increase the profit. Clear? So this was the kind of situation that emerged in Europe after industrial revolution and the parallel urbanization. So government in India, in order to support this enhancement in Western nations, especially Britain, what did they do? They started to follow a policy of free trade or unrestricted entry of British goods. So when Indian goods went into Britain, heavy customs duties were imposed. But when British goods came to India, customs duties were not at all there, so it was a free trade. They could dump as much as they want into India. So how did this affect the Indian industry? The output of factories were huge, in quantity and also quality. The machines were perfected in such a way that they could produce huge quantities of high quality products at very cheap rates. So the Indian traditional handicraftsmen, Indian traditional workers couldn't compete with that level of production. We are still doing the manual production, the manual way of making all these things. We are not mechanized. We do not have machines here to do it that cheaply. So Indian handicrafts industries were exposed to this kind of competition from the West. So this was not enough for British. So Indian handicraft industry is collapsing. They also lost the patronage, royal patronage, because British has took over most of the princely states of India. So lack of royal patronage also enhanced the misery of Indian handicraftsmen. Similarly, despite all these things, British still wanted to maximize their profits. They still wanted to enhance their profits. This is not enough for them. So what did they do? They started to engage in a policy of fresh conquests and direct occupation of protected states. In the previous lesson, we studied about Dalhousie's policy of doctrine of lapse. Similarly, Dalhousie finding some means making up reasons to annex Oudh for the pretext was misgovernance in that case. Subsidiary alliance. So in general, British started to acquire more and more territories through conquest, or through strong arming the princely state, or whatever other policies that they use. Why? By bringing more and more territory under their control, they can actually expand the market that is available for European goods in India. The more territory they conquer, they can impose this kind of free trade in those territories as well. So there is more market for European finished goods, thereby Europeans gaining even more profit. Clear? So basically, even now, the only goal of Britain is to enhance profit for the company. Okay, you can, try to, you can completely destroy Indian native industries, handicraft industries, etc., etc. But even then, all that matters is English East India Company maximize their profits. Okay, this was their only concern. So instead of exporting manufacturers, India now was forced to export raw materials. So until now, the calicos or the finished cotton clothes, etc., were exported. Similarly, finished silk was exported to other parts of the world. But from now onwards, we see that instead of exporting manufactured goods or finished products, India basically starts to export raw materials. Okay, so raw cotton, raw silk, indigo, okay, jute. Okay, these kinds of raw materials are now being exported rather than finished goods. So from India, raw materials will go to Britain, and from Britain, finished goods will come to India. This was the arrangement. So India is now basically a supplier of raw materials and a market for finished goods. This was the condition of India. India was a supplier of raw materials and a market for finished goods, which basically means a huge drain is happening not in favor of India, in favor of Britain. Okay, this actually destroyed the Indian industries. We will later see, from various books written by Dadabhai Nauroji and other R.C. Dutt, etc., etc., that this kind of economic policy that was followed by Britain in India actually caused a huge, decrease in India's output and thereby lowering India's GDP to a huge extent. Okay, also, British promoted the sale of Indian opium in China. Indian opium was also very much, demanded substance in various parts of the world, especially in China. So British East India Company actually promoted the sale of opium into China. Opium has this, it is a drug, okay, and it has very huge negative effects on personal health, etc., etc. But still, it was very much in demand and it was pretty costly. And British made sure that they made profit out of opium as well. Interestingly, the import of opium into Britain was strictly banned. So it doesn't matter if the Chinese people use this drug and lose their health, as long as British East India Company gets profit. But British people should not use it. Okay, so this was the kind of double standard set by Europeans, especially the British, back in the 18th and early part of 19th century. Okay, so this was the kind of trade happening around those times. Now we are going to see the drain of wealth. If there are any questions, okay, plenty of points by Seema. Yeah, continuing. The drain of wealth. The British exported to Britain part of India's wealth and resources for which India got no adequate economic or material return. Already explained this point, so I'm moving on. Okay, so previously, even foreign conquerors, for example Mughals, once they came to India, they settled down in India. Okay, English were not the first foreigners to arrive in India and conquer India. Okay, Mughals, for example, Babur is not an Indian. Okay, Babur is from Middle East. Okay, he came to India, he settled in India and he made India his own home. Okay, so what happens? Even if he starts to use bad economic policies, everything will stay in India itself. Okay, I mean, he can impose heavy land revenue or heavy duties all across his territory, but still everything that is collected will be invested into India only, because they made India their home. Okay, but British, on the contrary, when they came to India, when they conquered India, they were not here to stay. Their idea was not to make India their home. Their idea was to exploit India and make Britain even more prosperous. Clear? This is the difference between other foreigners who came to India before the Europeans and the Europeans. Okay, so the drain of wealth from Bengal began from 1757 after the Battle of Plassey, Siraj-ud-Dawla losing to Robert Clive. Okay, 1765, company acquired the Diwani of Bengal, gaining control of its revenues, and they began to purchase Indian goods out of this revenue and started to call it as investments. I already explained this point in the previous lecture. Okay, this revenue that they got from India through their Diwani rights were employed to, or they were used as expense for their exports to Britain. Okay, and they started to call this revenue as their investment. Actually, it's not their investment because they didn't bring it from Britain. They amassed this wealth by imposing Diwani rights or acquiring Diwani rights of Bengal and other provinces such as Bihar, Orissa, etc. later on. Clear? Anyway, it's called the British investments. So, development of means of transport and communication. So, overall, the trade is happening on a one-way basis. Britain is becoming more and more rich, more and more powerful, more and more industrialized. India is left back, stagnated. Their native industries collapsed. Okay, but around the middle of 19th century, or up till the middle of 19th century, the means of transport and communication was very much traditional. Okay, in India, the means of transport used to be bullock carts, okay, or camel carts or pack horses, etc., etc. Very much traditional, not at all, up to the progress of other parts of the world. British people understood that if they can set up a cheaper and faster means of transport and communication, it could actually contribute to the enhancement of trade. Okay, this is the reason why British established roads and railways, etc., etc. in India. Okay, they did not do it out of philanthropic or say out of sympathy or anything. British introduced railways in India and they constructed various roads in India, etc., etc., for the sole purpose that faster means of transport and communication can actually enhance their own revenues in trade. Okay, so they started to introduce steamships in India. They started to construct roads all across India. The first railway engine, which was designed by George Stephenson, was put on rails in England back in 1814. Okay, the first time in Europe, the railway engine was actually designed by a person called George Stephenson, and this was put in England rails in 1814. Okay, and railways actually opened a huge untapped market to the interiors of the country. Clear? British was a huge naval power. I mean, they conducted their trade with India and other parts of the world using sea trade. Okay, they came all the way through Cape of Good Hope or later through Suez Canal into India, and they took all the raw materials back to Britain. Okay, so this was done by ships or naval trade. There was no effective means of transport within the interiors of the country. Okay, for example, if you have adequate amount of resources in Mumbai, you can bring it to Britain. Similarly, if you have it in Chennai or say in Calcutta, you can bring it to Britain. But if it is say in the interiors of the country, say in Bhopal or say Indore, okay, or some other interior parts of the country, there was no effective means of transport which can get them to a seaport at an adequate pace or at an adequate quantity. You can't rely on bullock carts or camels to take all these in large amounts and bring it to Madras or Calcutta or etc., etc. This is the reason why they introduced railways. Railways can connect India, any place in India to any other place in India. So basically, rail lines were laid from interiors of India to the export terminals such as Mumbai, Madras, Chennai, Calcutta, etc. Okay, so this enabled them to administer the country more effectively and efficiently and to protect their regime from internal rebellion or external aggression by enabling more rapid mobilization and movements of troops. That's also there. Okay, it's not just about making a network of faster movements between one part of the country to another. It has also another advantage that British can deploy large number of troops in small amount of time. Okay, so introduction of railways actually helped them later in 1857, okay, when the revolt happened. Why? Because large number of British people or personnel can be brought from a very far place to the revolt area in very small amount of time using railway networks. Okay, so British used railways for two purposes. One, to connect interiors of India into the export terminals such as Bombay or Madras or Calcutta, and two, to deploy their troops efficiently and effectively in a very small amount of time. Clear? So development of means of transport and communication helped the English East India Company in a huge way. The earliest suggestion to build a railway in India came back in 1831. Okay, railways were introduced in India only in 1850s. Okay, but the suggestion of introduction of railways in India came back in 1831 in Madras. Okay, this is a prelims question. That's why I'm specifically mentioning it. All right, but the problem was that this railway, which was proposed in 1831, was not actually a railway that is run by steam engine, but rather it was a railway which was drawn by horses. Okay, horses are supposed to pull the railway wagon. This was not at all feasible idea, or so it was dropped. Okay, it was not introduced in any reasonable scale at all. Okay, the first construction of steam-driven railways in India was proposed in 1834 in England. Okay, so the English manufacturers, the English merchants, etc. knew that India was a land of resources and potential. So they proposed that in India, railway lines should be laid so that they can maximize their profit. Okay, Indians did not request for it. Indians actually initially objected to it, considering railways as something Western that is put in India in order to attack Indian civilization, etc., etc. Okay, whenever the Westerners tried to introduce some kind of reform or change in Indian traditional setup, Indians always opposed to it, except the Indian intelligentsia. The common people of India, the orthodox sections especially, objected to any kind of reforms that were brought in by Westerners. So here also railways were initially objected by the Indians. But anyway, because of the forcible demands made by the merchants, European merchants in England, finally Indian railways became a possibility in 1850s, especially in 1853, when the first railway line opened in India between Bombay and Thane. Okay, the first railway lines was opened in India between Bombay and Thane in the year 1853, and Lord Dalhousie was the Governor General of India around this time. Okay, during the time of Dalhousie, there are plenty of things that takes place in India. For example, you will come across postage stamps, telegraph, etc., etc. He's a very important Governor General. You have to study what all happened during his time. There is a page towards the end of the Spectrum textbook where important events during the time of a Governor General is listed. So just read through that as well before going for your prelims examination. Okay, so what are some of the important points that we have to note here? Okay, anyway, to enhance their profits, they managed to lay railway lines in India. So there are some interesting points associated with this fact. For one, the entire amount, almost the entire amount that was invested into the Indian railways came from British investors. Okay, around 350 crores of rupees. That time, back in 19th century, 350 crores is like huge amount. It is not valued at today's prices. Back in 1850s, 350 crores is a very huge amount. Okay, and almost the entire amount came from British investors. So Indian Railways started its initial stages through British investors. The Indian contribution to it was negligible. Okay, they were for the first 50 years financially losing. Okay, which were not able to pay interest on capital invested in them. For the first 50 years, Indian Railways were actually losing. So how did Britain manage to get that kind of investment into the Indian Railways? In Britain, normally the rate of returns for any kind of investment was 2%. Okay, usually for any other investment in Britain, rate of returns were 2%. But the government promised that if you invest into the Indian Railways, you will get a 5% return for your investment. Okay, a 5% returns was promised for investing in Indian Railways. This is what attracted the British investors into Indian Railways at 3% more than what they could get in England. Okay, but despite this promise, it was not easy to uphold it, because for the first 50 years, Indian Railways were running at loss, not at all making any profit. Okay, in their planning, construction and management, economic and political development of India and her people was not kept in the forefront. So, introduction of railways into India was merely for British benefits. The profit or the enhancement of quality of life in India, or say the enhancement of economy of India, etc., was not at all a concern. This was, most of the policies of British personnel around this time was entirely selfish. Nothing done for philanthropic activities, or nothing done by viewing the condition of Indians or for the good of Indians. Okay, British also established an efficient and modern postal system. Clear, and also introduced telegraph. The first telegraph was established between Calcutta and Agra, also opened in the year 1853. Railways also, Bombay-Thana line also opened in 1853. The Calcutta-Agra telegraph line also opened in 1853. Both happened during the time of Lord Dalhousie. Dalhousie also introduced the idea of postage stamps. Okay, before introduction of postage stamps, if you want to send a letter from, say, Delhi to Mumbai and say Delhi to Calcutta, it depended on the distance that has to be traveled. Okay, so if a letter is to be dispatched from Delhi to Mumbai or Bombay, and another letter from Delhi to, say, Kerala, the second one will cost more than the first one. Why? Because Kerala is much more far away from Delhi. But by introducing postage stamps, this kind of anomaly was removed from postal system. So from now onwards, depending on the weight of the parcel, I mean, not at all depending on distance. Okay, so depending solely on the weight of the parcel, the amount of postage stamp was determined. Okay, so basically, Lord Dalhousie made a uniform rate of half an anna for a letter all over the land. So the amount that you have to utilize to send a post in India rapidly came down. Postage system in India began to become less and less costly for people. It began to become cheap. You can send a post anywhere to India using half an anna. Clear? This is some of the good aspects of British rule. Okay, we have plenty of bad aspects, but there are some silver linings also. This is one of them. Okay, now we are going to look into the land revenue policy. So far we looked into manufacturing, we looked into trade, etc., railways, etc. Now we are going to look into the land revenue policy. So one thing is for sure, the burden of providing money for all this, trade, manufacturing, etc., came from Indian peasants. Okay, Indian peasants were oppressed. They were, they had to, face the brunt of huge taxation. Clear? That is unquestionable. In the end, it was the Indian peasant who has to pay up for all these things. Okay, so in order to gain more profits from land revenue, British actually established three kinds of land revenue policies in India. First one is permanent settlement, second one is Raitwari, and third one is Mahalwari. Okay, all these three are very important. We are going to look into one by one. This is the last part of this chapter. Okay, the permanent settlement system. In 1765, okay, let me look into your questions. Yeah, Satya, that is a good question. That's what I told. They did, although they promised that 5% return for Indian investment, British investment into Indian railways, they couldn't afford to pay it. Okay, the company was loss making. Okay, loss making company can never pay that kind of promise. So they failed to pay that kind of returns to the British investors, and they understood that the Indian railways were, enhancing in a very small pace. Okay, initially all the investors into Indian railways were private British personals. Okay, but at some point of time they understood that Indian railways has to be accelerated in a much higher pace. So they converted Indian Railways into a state affair. Okay, took it out from the private hands and made it into a state business. But that too did not work. And later they gave it back to the private players. Okay, so during these times, during the entire 50 years of period, many changes were made into the functioning or administration of Indian Railways. Nothing worked. Still, the company was making huge losses, and they couldn't pay the 5% returns. They had to go back on their promise of 5% returns. Okay, but later on it will start to make profit. Initially, the initial 50 years were hugely loss making. Okay, they couldn't keep their promise. Permanent settlement. In 1765, the East India Company acquired the Diwani or control over revenues of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. Already you know this. In 1773, it decided to manage the land revenues directly. Okay, so until now we had zamindars, middlemen, etc., etc. But from 1773 onwards, British East India Company decided to manage the land revenue policy directly. So Warren Hastings started this policy of auctioning the right to collect land revenue to the highest bidders. Okay, something similar to the revenue farming that existed in India way earlier. Okay, but his experiment did not succeed. Okay, neither the Ryot nor the Zamindar would do anything to improve their cultivation because they don't know how much they will have to pay in the next year. By each year, the amount of revenue that was collected, the amount of tax that was collected varied according to, say, produce, according to lot of other factors. So neither the Zamindar nor the Ryot was willing to put any further efforts. Why? Because if their productivity is high, a comparatively higher amount of tax will be taken by British. Okay, so if their productivity is low, still the taxation is unknown. I mean, what kind of tax will the British collect? This is very much unpredictable. Okay, so nobody was actually trying to do anything to enhance Indian agriculture. There was a confusion in the field of Indian agriculture. Okay, so this is the period when the Britishers understood that some kind of predictability or some kind of stability has to be infused into the field of Indian agriculture. And this is how the permanent settlement system comes into being. In this system was actually brought forth in Bengal and Bihar initially in 1793 by none other than Lord Cornwallis. Okay, permanent settlement system, one of the very important land revenue settlements you have to study for UPSC. This was actually introduced in Bengal and Bihar in 1790s by Lord Cornwallis. According to this, the zamindars and revenue collectors were converted into landlords. Okay, the zamindars and collectors were converted into landlords. Until now, the system was such that zamindars and zamindars owned a huge portion of land, but still tenants also had some kind of right in their lands. Okay, until now, until the permanent settlement system, although zamindar was the owner of that piece of land, tenants also had some claim onto this land. For example, if the tenant actually paid the rent correctly, zamindar cannot evict the tenant out of that land. Okay, this was a customary right to the tenant. But through permanent settlement system, the zamindar and revenue collector became the actual landlords, which means they got the ownership of this land entirely and they could have this as a hereditary property and they can transfer it to anyone that they want. So basically, the cultivators and tenants cultivators became mere tenants. Okay, cultivators from now onwards have no right onto their land because their customary rights were taken away through permanent settlement system. Number 2, the zamindars were supposed to give 10 out of 11th. Okay, 10 by 11th of their collection they have to give to the government. They have to give to the company. And they can keep 1 by 11th of their collected amount for themselves. Okay, so if they collect say 110 rupees, 10 by 11 of 110. Okay, that is how much? 100 rupees they have to give to Britain and the remaining 10 rupees they can keep for themselves. This was the idea. Okay, so problem was that the amount that they collected, okay, the amount that the zamindar collected was not fixed. Okay, the zamindar can actually collect whatever amount he wants. Okay, he can collect 100 rupees, he can collect 1000 rupees, he can collect 10,000 rupees, whatever he wants he can collect. The only fact is that the zamindar has to pay 10 out of 11th to the company and keep 1 out of 11th. Okay, so basically we will see that permanent settlement system, although in a way gave a stable income to the English East India Company, it actually oppressed and ruined the Indian peasant. Okay, we will come to that in the next slide. Okay, so the need to create a political allies. Okay, why did British give the rights of these lands to the zamindar? Because they need to create political allies, a wealthy and privileged class of zamindars which owed their existence to British rule. So by transferring all these rights to the zamindars, now British has some kind of loyalty from the zamindars. Okay, a section of Indians, okay, the wealthy section of Indians are now owing themselves to the British. Also, financial security. Through permanent settlement system, the British will get a fixed amount of money for sure every year. Okay, so that kind of financial security or stability is provided through this settlement. Permanent settlement system was expected to increase agricultural production. Okay, once it is a permanent settlement, Britishers thought that the land is now the hereditary property of the zamindar. So the idea of Britishers was that the zamindar will now put in investment into his own land to increase its productivity. Okay, this was the thought process. So this was supposed to increase the agricultural production in India as well. Okay, so basically this is the permanent settlement system. According to this settlement system, the land revenue was fixed. Okay, the land revenue was fixed forever, and zamindar was given the ownership or the final authority over that land. As long as the zamindar pays a fixed amount to the English East India Company, the zamindar can keep that ownership rights forever. But if at a point of time, if the zamindar fails to pay that fixed amount to the company, then this land will be taken away from the zamindar and auctioned it to someone else. Okay, the next highest bidder will get the land. Clear? This was how permanent settlement system happened. Clear? I hope it's clear. If you have any queries, please put it in the chat. I will look into it. The other kind of system was right-wari settlement. Okay, the second type which happened in India was the right-wari settlement. This was introduced in South India and Southwestern India. A peculiarity of this region is that we do not have any zamindars here. Okay, or zamindars or large estates, large collectors were absent in South India. So here we cannot impose a zamindar. Okay, we cannot start a system of zamindari in South India because it will completely ruin the social structure of South India, and it will obviously have reactions from the citizens. So instead of implementing the permanent settlement system in South India, Britishers came up with another beautiful system called right-wari settlement. Okay, this was actually a brainchild of Reed and Monroe. They recommended that settlement should directly be made with the actual cultivators, no middleman, no zamindar. Okay, directly with the peasant, directly with the cultivator, they will make the arrangement. This is the underlying principle of right-wari settlement. Okay, so the cultivator himself was recognized as the owner of his plot of land, and he was supposed to pay land revenue. Okay, this kind of settlement system, the right-wari settlement, was in the end introduced in parts of Madras and Bombay and presidencies in the beginning of 19th century. It started in South and Southwest India. It was also introduced in Madras and Bombay presidencies at a later period. But unlike the permanent settlement system where the tax collected was fixed forever, okay, the exorbitant rates were collected, but still the rate was fixed forever in permanent settlement system. But in right-wari settlement, the tax was not fixed forever. There was periodic reviews after every 20 to 30 years. Okay, after the end of 20 to 30 years, there will be a review and the tax rates will be accordingly revised. Clear? So, peasants of India actually thought that there won't be a middleman and they are dealing directly with the company, so they will benefit out of it. Problem was that although there was no zamindars in name in South India, British themselves became the zamindar. That is what happened. Okay, lots and lots of small zamindars were actually replaced by one huge zamindar, that is the English East India Company. This was the drawback of right-wari settlement. Okay, the land revenue was fixed at exorbitant rates. Very huge revenue was asked. Government retained the right to enhance the land revenue at will. Right had to pay revenue even when his produce was partially or wholly destroyed by drought or floods. Okay, so overall a very oppressive kind of revenue settlement. That is the right-wari settlement. No middleman, but even without middleman, British managed to oppress the Indian peasants. That's it. Finally, the last one, Mahalwari settlement. I will look into your comments after this one. Okay, Mahalwari system. So, Mahalwari system is actually a modified version of Zamindari. Zamindari means permanent settlement. Okay, Zamindari and permanent settlement system are the same. Then we have right-wari and now we have Mahalwari. Mahalwari is a modified version of Zamindari. This was actually implemented in the Gangetic Valley, northwestern provinces and central India around Punjab and in Punjab. Okay. So here the settlement was done in a fashion such that the revenue settlement was to be made village by village or estate by estate. This is why it is called Mahalwari. Estate, Mahal means estate. Okay, so the revenue settlement was done village by village or estate by estate rather than cultivator by cultivator or zamindar by zamindar. Okay, so the idea here is that this entire village or the entire estate has to collectively give a particular amount as revenue. Okay, doesn't matter how they acquire this revenue, they can collect it in any rate from the individual peasants, but together this village or this estate has to give this much amount to the British East India Company. This was the Mahalwari system. Okay, and here also the land revenue was periodically revised. So if you look at it overall, through permanent settlement system, right-wari system and Mahalwari system, the Britishers has now managed to convert land into some kind of private property which can be sold, which can be mortgaged and which can be taken away from the person. Correct? Until now, such a system was not in existence in India. But from now onwards, land is saleable. Similarly, if the zamindar, say in permanent settlement system, if the zamindar cannot pay the British an adequate amount, or say in right-wari settlement, if the cultivator cannot pay his dues to the British government, what will happen? They can actually mortgage their land into a money lender, collect the money from the money lender and pay to the British government. So money lenders also started exploiting these people. Okay, so right-wari system basically tries to eliminate the middleman, but by making land a mortgageable property, by making land a saleable property and an alienable property, Britishers created this middlemen named as the money lenders, who also started oppressing the peasants and other cultivators across India. So overall, all these systems, although was introduced to get a stable income to the British East India Company, it did nothing for enhancement of the quality of life of peasants. Okay, cultivators and peasants in India kept on suffering, kept on living their miserable life throughout 18th and 19th century. We won't see any reasonable enhancement in their living standards anytime soon. Even now, we see plenty of protests by agriculturists, right? Even very recently, there were protests in Delhi regarding the new acts that was passed, that is put forth by the current government. Okay, do read about those things in newspapers also. Try to understand what is happening and try to critically analyze it, etc., etc. Okay, that will help you for answering your UPSC mains questions. So this is all about the different kinds of revenue settlements in India and the basic kind of economic policy that was followed by British in trade, manufacture, agriculture and land revenue in India. Okay, that is the end of chapter 5. So now we start chapter 6, that is administrative organization and social and cultural policy. But before that, let me see if you have any queries. Can we say that Izardari system of revenue collection and permanent settlement system were same in their feature as both system had mediatories? Izardari system and permanent settlement system, it's not exactly the same. There are some kind of differences between them, but it's true that they both has middlemen. Okay, in the other one, in the Izardari system, the middleman can collect any amount as they want. They have to pay a fixed amount to the crown. Okay, and they can keep the remaining to themselves. But in permanent settlement system, it's not like that. Whatever they collect, 10 out of 11th has to be given to the crown. Okay, for example, in Izardari system, if a person if the middleman has to pay 10 rupees to the crown, if he collects 100 rupees, he can keep 90 to himself and pay 10 to the company. Okay, if he collects 1000 rupees, he still has to pay 10 rupees. He can keep 990 to himself. But here in permanent settlement system, it's different. Say, if he collects 100 rupees, he has to pay how much? 10 by 11th of 100. Which means he can keep only 1 by 11th of 100. If he collects 1000 rupees, he has to still pay 10 by 11th of 1000. So proportional amount has to be given to the company. Okay, it's not exactly fixed, it is actually proportional here, and he can keep 1 by 11th of 1000. Okay, if the zamindar manages to acquire new properties or expand his control over new areas, he can by himself keep all the new revenues coming from these areas. That is there. Okay, assume that the zamindar managed to acquire new lands or add new territories to his domain. Okay, the additional income that he gets from these newly acquired lands, he can keep for himself. Okay, but still some small dissimilarities are there between Izardari system and permanent settlement system. Okay, anyway, chapter 6, administrative organization and social and cultural policy. So in the beginning, the company left the administration of its possessions in India in Indian hands, confining its activities to supervision. So again, we are going back to the East India Company's initial stages. There, it was merely a trading outpost, a trading company. The administration was left into the hands of Indians. But very soon, they understood that for maximizing their profit, they have to have more control over administration. So during the time of Warren Hastings and Cornwallis, administration of Bengal was completely overhauled, and the foundations of a new system based on English pattern was laid. Okay, so they began to acquire more and more power in the administration of India. British administration in India was based on 3 pillars. Very important, 3 pillars. Civil service, also known as the steel frame of India, army and police. Okay, the chief aim of British Indian administration was the maintenance of law and order. This is a point that I already explained in the first chapter. By maintaining law and order, they can actually, better their own rule in India and, better their trade in India. If law and order situation was poor, then obviously the trade will not happen at the required pace. The trade will also be hindered. So by taking control over law and order, Britishers made sure that the trade between England and India flourished at its best. Okay, so they always relied on superior force and army, police, etc., rather than trying to maintain control by acquiring Indian herds. Okay, so rather than trying to actually get the Indians to like them, they tried to strong arm the Indians for maintaining law and order. Okay, so first of all, civil service. Civil service was actually brought into existence by Lord Cornwallis. Okay, we are all preparing for civil service examination, but the first kind of civil service which was put in India was an establishment made by Lord Cornwallis. Okay, so when Cornwallis came to India, he saw that English East India Company was not doing so well. Its private members are doing private trade. I mean, its members are servants are doing private trade at huge quantities. Corruption was at its highest. But still, company was not doing so well. The wages which the company provided to its servants were extremely low. Okay, he understood that this is the reason why the servants are engaging in private trade. Okay, so what did he do? Cornwallis realized that the company servants would not give honest and efficient service so long as they were not given adequate salaries. Okay, small amount of wages will not do. So Cornwallis decided to enhance the wages or salaries of the servants of the East India Company. Okay, during the time of Cornwallis, civil service in India became the highest paid job in the world. Okay, being a civil servant of English East India Company became the highest paid job in the world. So by giving that kind of high salaries, Cornwallis made sure that the servants of the company will not engage in corrupt means, etc., etc., thereby saving the English East India Company. He also made sure that the promotion in civil service would be based on seniority only, so that outside influences cannot hurt the administrative structure. Okay, it will strictly be based on seniority. So otherwise what will happen? Nepotism or say red tapeism or recommendations, etc., can come in between and destroy the entire structure. Correct? By making it that civil service will, the promotion in civil service will happen only through seniority, Cornwallis made sure that this structure is kept away from outside influences. Okay. Later on, after Cornwallis, when Wellesley came to India, he understood that rather than merely appointing a servant into high posts, it is important to give adequate education in the field of civil service for these employees or for these servants of the company. For giving adequate training for these people, he established a college of Fort William at Calcutta, okay, to train the civil servants. But problem was that the directors of the company, okay, the court of directors was not in favor of this college. They disapproved it. Okay, so the college was established in 1800, and very soon, by 1806, this college was bounded up, and another college was started in Haileybury in England for the same purpose. Okay, the court of directors did not like the idea that a college is there in India to train the civil servants of the company. So instead of that, they opened a college in England to train the civil servants in English methods and then send them to India. Okay, so this college was established in Haileybury. This college was called as East Indian College. This is also again to train the civil servants of English East India Company. Till 1853, all appointments to the civil service were made by the directors of East India Company and some appointments by Board of Control. Okay, till 1853, Court of Directors did not allow the British authorities, the government authorities, to do much in the Indian civil service. They tried to control Indian civil service as much as they could. Okay, plenty of other powers were given away. For example, the monopoly of trade over India, monopoly of tea and trade over China, etc., were given away through various charter acts. But even then, the Court of Directors was not willing to give away the power to appoint civil servants in its company until 1853. Through the Charter Act of 1853, this civil service was thrown open to everyone. It was thrown open as an open competition, and even Indians were allowed to enter it. Okay, you know that. We will look into that in the future chapters. Okay. Until 1853, civil service was pretty much rigid, and we can see a complete exclusion of Indians. Okay, only in 1853 it was thrown open to everyone, at least in name. Okay, so as time went on, I already have mentioned English East India Company's the position of a civil servant in English East India Company became the highest paid job in the world. It became a very powerful job as well. Okay, the position of civil servant of a company became a very high powered job. Okay, came to form rigid and exclusive and proud caste with an extremely conservative and narrow outlook. So these people, these servants of the company, these civil servants, they became more and more powerful, but they were not at all liberal in their outlook. Okay, they were highly conservative in nature, and they had a narrow outlook. Narrow outlook in the sense they were focusing on maximizing the profits of company only. They did not try to do anything for the Indians as such. Their only aim was maximize the company's profits. So Indian civil service had often been called as steel frame which reared and sustained British rule in India. This is a possible mains question. Why is Indian civil service often called as the steel frame of British rule in India? Okay, we will see that entire rule of British, throughout the rule of British East India Company, and then later on the Crown rule in India, civil service played a very important role in sustaining the administration of Britain in India. Okay, we will see more points when we go through the next chapters, but for now, and I at least try to understand how civil service was established in India, what kind of powers were given to them, what kind of salaries were paid to them, what was their overall outlook, etc. etc. Okay, so this is how civil service came to India. Set up by Cornwallis, then Wellesley, then entirely redesigning the concept of civil service as such. Okay, so this is the first pillar. Second pillar is the army. Okay, there are three pillars: civil service, army, and police. So second pillar is the army. Army is the instrument through which the Indian powers were conquered. Okay, it defended the British Empire against foreign rivals and safeguarded British supremacy from the ever-present threat of internal revolt. So basically, to maintain law and order situations and to acquire more and more territories, to fight away the rivals of Britain, etc. etc. Army was used by British. We all know this. We saw plenty of wars by Britain in the previous session. Army was playing the major role in all these attacks. Okay, bulk of the company's army consisted of Indian soldiers. This is a very interesting point. Okay, Indian soldiers were recruited in huge numbers into the company's army. Okay, in company's army, the number of Europeans were actually considerably less than the Indian numbers. So basically, if Indians stood united and had that feeling of nationalism, Britishers could have been easily defeated. But Britishers were able to buy Indians to do their bidding in the army. That's an unfortunate fact. Okay, but despite having a numerical majority, Indians never held any official post, any officer posts. Okay, almost all official posts or the ranks of officer and above were exclusively given to British personnels only. Okay, the highest rank an Indian officer could get was that of a Subedar. Okay, usually Indians were employed as Shipais, and the maximum rank that they could reach was up to Subedar. There was absence of modern nationalism in the country at that time. So this is one of the reasons why Britishers were able to maintain such a huge army, having huge number of Indians in their bidding. Okay, there was no sense of nationalism. So if you recruit a huge amount of soldiers from Punjab, okay, they have no sense of India at that time. They were soldiers from Punjab, so they could be used against Marathas, or they could be used against some other state. Similarly, if you recruit from the Maharashtra region or the Maratha army at that time, these soldiers can be used against Bengal or say Mysore. Okay, there is no sense of India back in those times. So this is one drawback which helped England in a huge way to maintain such a huge army. Second thing was that Indian soldier was more or less a mercenary. What does a mercenary means? A mercenary means somebody who can be paid to do the military job. Okay, so as long as the company pays money, the soldier will owe loyalty to the company. If somebody else pays more money, the soldier will go to that person. So mercenary means you can hire that person for money. Okay, so that was the condition of Indian soldier at that time, because there is no nationalism. So you are not fighting for anything. You are fighting for money, that's it. So whoever pays money, you will do their bidding. Okay, so these factors actually helped the Britain in maintaining such a huge army throughout its time. Then comes the police, the third pillar. I will look into your comments and questions after this. Okay, the police. Police was also a brainchild of Cornwallis. Okay, actually in India, the system of police came first, even before it came in Britain. Okay, thanks to Cornwallis. So Cornwallis decided to relieve the zamindars of their police functions. Okay, initially before the system of police came into being, zamindars were also doing the policing functions. For example, preventing robbery or dacoity or theft, etc., etc. It was also done by Zamindar. Cornwallis separated this power and formed a regular police force to maintain law and order. Clear? So Cornwallis established a system of circles or thanas headed by a daroga who was an Indian. So this is the smallest unit of a police. Okay, small circles, also called thanas, which was headed by a daroga. Clear? And then there were superior officers. See, these superior officers were always Europeans. Darogas were Indians, but above him, the other superior officials were always exclusively recruited from Europeans. In villages, this duty was given to village watchmen, who were maintained by villagers only. Okay, in cities and say in towns, a separate system of police was maintained by British, but in villages, the function was given to the village watchmen, who are maintained by the villagers itself. Okay, he didn't form a exclusive police force in village areas. Okay, so the most important aspect or the most important function that the police undertook in those times was the suppression of thugs. Okay, similarly, prevented the organization of large-scale conspiracy against the British. Similarly, later on, during the time of national movement, police was used to suppress the national movement. So these were the three important functions of police in British Raj. Number one, suppression of thugs. By suppressing thugs, Britishers made sure that there is law and order in the area, thereby smoothing the trade and travel in that region, thereby benefiting the English East India Company. Second one, prevent organization of large-scale conspiracy against Britain. The police were used as spies to some extent. They were able to make sure that there is no large conspiracy happening against the British Raj. And third, when the national movement started, police was employed for lathi charges, firing upon people, massacres, etc., etc. Okay, we can see that later when we study national movement. During the anti-Simon Commission protests, it is actually the police who, lathi charge on the protesters, and Lala Lajpat Roy, who gets severe blows in his chest, eventually dies. You know the story. Okay, so police were used to, in a huge extent in the national movement to maintain British control over the Indian territories. Okay. Alright, so no questions so far. Continuing with the next topic, that is judicial organization. So we studied about civil service, looked into army, looked into police. Now we are going to look into the judicial organization. So how was this done? Judiciary. So there was a hierarchy of civil and criminal courts. So you know what a civil court is and what a criminal court is. I hope that's clear. So there was a hierarchy for both these kinds of courts. It was actually started by Warren Hastings. Okay, the system was stabilized by Cornwallis in 1793. So Warren Hastings started judicial organization in India, but it was stabilized to a greater extent by Cornwallis in 1793. So each district was given a Diwani Adalat or a civil court. Okay, we are going to look into the civil aspect first, and then we will look into the criminal aspects. So each district had a civil court named as Diwani Adalat. This was presided over by a district judge who belonged to the civil service. Okay, each district had a Diwani Adalat presided over by a district judge recruited from civil service. Cornwallis separated the posts of civil judge from the collector. So until this judicial organization was taken place, collector used to have the judicial functions as well. Okay, now we see that Cornwallis has separated the post of civil judge from that of a collector. Even now, the collector is not a civil judge. Collector has magisterial powers even now in India. That is why he is also called as the district magistrate. But even then, there is a separate civil judge who looks into the judicial aspects. Okay, so any appeal from this district court lay first to the 4 provincial courts of civil appeal, and then finally to the Sadar Diwani Adalat. Okay, so if a verdict has been given by the Diwani Adalat and you are not happy with it, you can appeal to the 4 provincial courts. Okay, one of the 4 provincial courts. And if you are not happy with the judgment there also, you can take it up with the Sadar Diwani Adalat. That is the highest civil court in the country at that time. Okay, I mean Governor General had even more power. Okay, that is different. But in this setup, in this judicial setup, Sadar Divani Adalat was the highest civil court. Okay. Now, below the district court, okay, below each district had a district court. So below the district court also, we had some minor courts known as registrars courts, headed by Europeans, and even below that, there were a number of subordinate courts headed by Indian judges known as municipes and amins. We even now have municipal courts, right? Municipal courts are the lowest civil judiciary courts. Okay, we have magistrate court and municipal court. So municipal courts here back in those times, municipal courts were exclusively headed by Indians. Okay, similarly, registrars courts and above were headed by Europeans. Okay, Indians were not allowed in high positions of judiciary either. Clear? All high posts for Europeans. Small, lower subordinate posts were given for Indians. So this was the civil judicial setup. Similarly, we have criminal setup as well, criminal judicial setup as well. This slide is a bit congested, sorry for that. I will upload it in the Telegram channel, download it and read it. Okay, so in the criminal cases, Cornwallis divided the presidency of Bengal into 4 divisions. Okay, in each of which a court of circuit was presided over by civil servants was established. So a court of circuit was established in each of the 4 divisions of Bengal, and each of this was presided over by a civil servant of the company. Below this court, there was plenty of subordinate courts which was headed by Indian magistrates to try petty cases. Small cases were tried by Indian magistrates. That came below the court of circuit. Above the court of circuit, any appeal above the court of circuit lay with the Sadar Nizamat Adalat. Either earlier we saw Sadar Divani Adalat, which looked into the civil aspects, and here Sadar Nizamat Adalat, which looks into the criminal cases. Okay, in general, the criminal cases were looked into using Muslim criminal law in a slightly modified and less harsh manner. So until British established their power in India, Mughals were the supreme power, right? So the Muslim system of criminal justice was happening all over India. For civil law, there is separate. Okay, for civil law, Hindus has their own laws, Muslims has their own laws. But in criminal aspects, it was a common law, and mostly it was based on Muslim law only because the rulers were Muslims. So Britishers continued with that to some extent with certain minor modifications. For example, mutilation, etc., or say some kind of very harsh punishments were taken away. Okay. In 1831, William Bentinck abolished the provincial courts of appeal and circuit. This is a prelims question. Okay, which Governor General abolished the provincial courts of appeal and circuit? It was done by William Bentinck in 1831. In 1815, high courts were established at Calcutta, Madras and Bombay to replace the Sadar courts of Divani and Nizamat. Okay, the Sadar Divani Adalat and Sadar Nizamat Adalat were both replaced by high courts in the year 1815. Even now we have high courts, right? We have high courts, we have a Supreme Court also. So that hierarchy was there even at those times, but under a different name. Okay, so so we saw how civil laws were maintained. We saw how criminal cases were tried. Overall, we see that there is no particular established method until now on how to deal with these kinds of cases. Okay, for Hindus, Hindu Shastras, etc. were looked into. For Muslims, it was the Sharia and all those things. Criminal law also followed based on the Mughal practice. Okay, so the Europeans wanted some kind of commonality. Okay, they wanted some kind of consolidation altogether, and for this purpose, they decided to enact and codify the old laws altogether. Okay, until now there is no codification of laws. It was based on what the emperor thought. Okay, you can bring in the petitioner and the accused into the emperor, and the emperor will decide what kind of punishment to be given. He will decide if he is guilty or not. Okay, that was the kind of judicial setup that happened until now in the country. But English people wanted something more well organized, well structured. For this purpose, they decided to codify the old laws. So Charter Act of 1833 conferred all lawmaking power on Governor General in Council. Indians were now to live increasingly under man-made laws, which might be good or bad, but which were openly the products of human reason. This is very important. Through Charter Act of 1833, all lawmaking powers were conferred on Governor General in Council. Okay, but the thing is that the lawmaking power was conferred into him. He could make any laws as he want, but all these laws were more or less, humanly reasonable. It could be good or bad. Okay, it could be, as far as Indians are concerned, it could be good or bad. Whatever it is, logical, or it is applied to human reasons rather than something relying upon ancient textbooks or say divine intervention or anything. Okay, until now in India, plenty of superstitions were there. There were plenty of sacred laws that cannot be questioned, that remained untouched, even though it is completely unreasonable and stupid. Okay, but all that was actually replaced by something exclusively reasonable. So that is a huge positive aspect of codification of Indian laws. 1833, the government appointed a law commission headed by Lord Macaulay to codify the Indian laws. And it was actually Macaulay who codified the Indian laws and created the Indian Penal Code, IPC, and the later on CRPC, the criminal, civil and criminal procedures and other codes of laws. Okay, so it was actually Lord Macaulay who did this. He was actually the chairperson of the law commission, which was placed in India by British. Okay, and this same law was supposed to be carried out throughout the country. Britishers have now conquered the entirety of India, and throughout the India, the same laws were supposed to be carried out. Doesn't matter if you are a Muslim or a Hindu or a Sikh or whatever, irrespective of region, irrespective of the kind of rule, you are supposed to follow these laws. So thereby, Britishers has now unified the judiciary in India. Okay, the entire subcontinent of India is now unified in a judicial manner. So this is a positive. Plenty of negatives are there when we talk about British rule in India, but there are some silver linings as well, as I have mentioned earlier, and this is one of them. We have that judicial unification throughout India. Okay, so now we see what is this rule of law. Still no questions, so continuing. Rule of law. So administration was to be carried out, at least in theory, in accordance to these established laws. Okay, these laws are codified. So administration was supposed to be carried out based on these, at least theoretically. Okay, in practice it was never done, but in theory it was supposed to be done like that. Clear? This actually gave some guarantee onto personal liberty of a person. So anybody can bring anybody in the court now. Earlier, if you are a Brahmin, you were given lesser punishment. If you belong to a lower class, you were severely punished. Similarly, as untouchable classes were couldn't have any kind of justice because they were looked down upon. They were considered as outcasts. But now even anyone in India, any subject or any citizen of India can bring anyone else before the court. So this actually guaranteed some kind of personal liberty for a person. Okay, so a kind of equality before law was established throughout India, irrespective of class, irrespective of religion or caste, etc., etc. Some kind of uniformity was established. The Europeans and their descendants had separate codes and even laws. This is the one drawback of the system. Okay, if the same law applied to everyone and if everyone was equal before the law, then Europeans should also have to obey the same law. They should also be brought before the same code, but they were excluded. Europeans cannot be tried by Indian judges. They had to be tried by European judges only. Special courts were maintained for them. So this kind of discrimination was established by Britain, although they managed to bring in some kind of judicial unity and equality throughout the judicial process in India. Okay, so justice became quite expensive. So this is another drawback. Justice became quite expensive. Court fees is there. Lawyers has to be engaged. Expenses of witness has to be met. Earlier, the person who had the complaint can go before, say, a Gram Nyayalaya or something like that, or directly before the ruler or something, and then he can say his grievance. It will be looked upon, and then the emperor will decide. That's it. There is no court fees or there is no lawyer or anything. He can present himself before the authority. But now the system is structured in such a way that lawyers finds place there. You have to pay a court fee. Similarly, you have to meet the expenses of the witness. So all in all, the judicial setup became extremely expensive. Also, the courts were established in faraway towns and all. Okay, the courts are not present in every other town. So sometimes a person will have to travel a long distance to file his complaint and to argue before the court. Similarly, lawsuits were dragged on for years. That happens even now. Correct. Even now, there are pending cases in Supreme Court which amounts to crores. Okay. Even there was a plenty of articles comes always in newspaper. Similarly, Chief Justice of India himself made some remarks regarding the pendency of cases in Supreme Court very recently. Okay. So even those times, the reason being these lawsuits are dragging on for years. At least in India now, criminal cases are taken in a very quick fashion, with smaller delays compared to civil cases. Civil cases will go on for ever. Okay, so that kind of dragging happened in judiciary. Now, complicated laws were beyond the grasp of illiterate and ignorant peasants. This is also true. Even now, it is hard to understand, right? If we take the Indian Penal Code or if we take something, a similar document and try to understand it ourselves, it is pretty complicated. There are plenty of legal terms which is beyond the comprehension of a common man. And at that time, Indians were illiterate. A huge majority of Indians were illiterate. So it is not digestible for them. So it made judiciary alienated from common people. Similarly, widespread prevalence of corruption in the ranks of police and the rest of administrative machinery. So it's the police who looks into all this now. Judiciary makes the decisions, but it's the police who is supposed to investigate and bring evidence and all. Corruption in police made sure that judiciary also crippled. Okay, so while the new judicial system marked a great step forward insofar as it was based on laudable principles of rule of law and equality before law and on rational and humane man-made laws, it was a retrograde step in some other aspects, such that it was now costlier and involved long delays. So there were some positives and some negatives. It is now codified. It is based on policies such as equality before law. It's based on liberty, etc., etc. But unfortunately, all this was not. Although it is based on very much, very great visions, in practice, it didn't become a reality because of the inherent flaws in the system. Okay. Social and cultural policy. So, judiciary is done. Now to the last part of this chapter, social and cultural policy. Till 1813, they were also following a policy of non-interference of religion, social and cultural life of the country. Okay, until 1813, the general attitude of Britain was that they will not interfere with Indians' religious policy or social structure or anything. Okay, they will conquer this territory and impose land revenue, etc., etc. But as far as religion, custom, etc. are concerned, they won't interfere at all. So a policy of non-interference was maintained. In England, around this time, Industrial Revolution happened. They wanted to make India even a bigger market. Okay, and they wanted Indians to transform into a modernized society. Okay, so in order for Western goods to be accepted in India, Indian society has to undergo some kind of transformation. Traditional Orthodox society of India may not be willing to buy the European or Western goods. So some kind of change in outlook of Indian society was very much necessary. Okay, for them to adapt the Western methods. So this actually made the England want to interfere with the Indian social setup. Clear? So science and technology also opened new vistas for human progress. So inventions, etc., etc., or enhancements in the area of science and technology also started to change the social fabric of India. We will very soon see that lots of Indians will start to get Western education. They will start to question everything. They will start to reason out everything. And all these things will have progressive impacts on the Indian society. French Revolution that happened in 1789, the liberty, equality, fraternity, all these concepts, this also started to inspire people all across the world. Also in India, we see that Tipu Sultan, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, all these people are, very much inspired by these concepts, and all these help in, bringing in a feeling of nationalism to the Indians. Similarly, the thinkers of the West, such as Bacon, Locke, Voltaire, Rousseau, Kant, Adam Smith, Bentham. Similarly, literature people such as Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Charles Dickens, their novels, all these began to be extremely widely read by educated people, and all these started to make them think. Okay, by reading all these all their novels, reading all their works, Indians started to think by themselves. They began to become more and more rational. They began to become more and more, they began to devise their opinion based on reason rather than some sacred or mythology or something like that. Okay, so overall we see a change in Indian social outlook. Rationalism or faith in reason and science, humanism or love of man, and confidence in the capacity of man to progress. These three were the three pioneering concepts that took charge of changing the society. Number one, rationalism or faith in reason and science. Rather than believing something in blindly, question it. Okay, apply logic to it, and if it stands the test of question, if it stands the test of reason, then you can adopt it. Otherwise, leave it. Okay, don't take something because it's written in some old sacred textbook. Okay, so the idea of rationalism was gaining ground in India. Similarly, humanism or love of man. What does that mean? That means you cannot treat somebody else in a miserable manner to enhance your happiness. You have to treat other human beings also as equal. Okay, so this idea of humanism gave birth to liberty, gave birth to equality, etc., etc. Okay, until now we see that some people are treated as untouchables. Some are treated as lower castes. Some are treated as slaves to a certain extent. All these were supposed to be replaced by equality. Okay, equality of caste, equality of in genders, etc., etc. Similarly, confidence in the capacity of man to progress. Okay, they start to believe that human beings can progress, can find a solution to any issue. So they started to have faith in themselves rather than waiting for some divine intervention or something like that, or a miracle. Okay, so finally, the humanistic outlook gave birth to the doctrines of individualism, liberalism, and socialism. Okay, according to the doctrine of progress, all societies must change with time, and nothing was or could be static. So all these together began to change or reform the Indian society in the 18th and 19th centuries. The new currents of thought in Europe came into conflict with the old outlook. So whenever some change is introduced into a society, obviously it will have some kind of resistance also. Correct? Some kind of resistance will also be there. I will be right back. 1 second, okay? Sorry for that, I had to open the door. Okay. So the new currents of thought in Europe came into conflict with the old outlook. So whenever you try to introduce something new into the society, it will always have resistance. Okay. So here also we see that even among the Western people, there are differences of opinion. There were conservative people and there were liberals as well. For example, the governor generals such as Warren Hastings, Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke was not a governor general, but Warren Hastings, Monroe, Elphinstone, Mulcahy, all these people were actually on the conservative side. Okay, so they believed that Indian civilization was different from European civilization, but it is not necessarily inferior to it. Okay, so they actually respected and admired the Indian philosophy and culture. Okay, they said that we should not intervene, or even if we are intervening in, then we should have a minimal intervention. Okay, they wanted to preserve Indian civilization for what it is at its best. Okay, so the conservative policy did not lead to the desired expansion of trade or provide adequately for the perpetuation of British supremacy. So this policy was not doing much for the East India Company. Okay, this policy was not doing enough for East India Company to expand and make more and more profits. So another kind of governor generals were also brought into India. This category, also known as the radicals, includes people like William Bentham, William Bentham and others. Okay, so what is the difference between conservatives and radicals? Conservatives, I already told you, they respected Indian ideals, they respected Indian civilization, etc., etc. But radicals were critical. Okay, they were not just critical; they went beyond criticism and imperialistic output and started to apply advanced humanistic and rational thought of the West to Indian situation. This is why we see that British Governor General such as William Bentham tries to interfere with Indian social customs as well, such as he tried to abolish sati. I mean, he implemented laws to abolish sati. Similarly, against female infanticide, all these things, widow remarriage. Okay, so these are the kind of governor generals who are known as radicals because they want to intervene into the Indian society and change it based on Western thought and progress. Clear? So the humanism of these men was aroused by the social injustice of such institutions such as caste system, untouchabilities, systems such as sati, infanticide, lower status of women, etc., etc. These are the reasons why these radicals emerged in India. Okay, because of the inherent flaws in Indian system. I mean, our civilization is great in a lot of respects, but it is a fact that these kinds of traditions such as sati, infanticide, low status for women, these are flaws. Okay, it doesn't matter if it is if it is the Europeans who try to intervene in India, but as far as these areas are concerned, it is nothing that India can be proud of. It's a fact. Okay, so for one example, James Mill. Okay, James Mill was actually a leading radical philosopher who came from England. He came to occupy in 1870 the very important position of Chief Examiner of the Office of Court of Directors. And another example is William Bentham, another radical, became the Governor General of India in 1829, etc., etc. Okay, so modernization of India in general was accepted by many English officials, businessmen, statesmen, etc., etc. Because they thought that Western education or modernization of India will make India a better market for them. Already I explained this point. Okay, so most of the Europeans actually supported this kind of radicalism in India. The basic dilemma before British administrators was that the British interest in India could not be served without some modernization. But full modernization would generate forces which would go against their interests. Okay, so you have to have that delicate balance. You have to modernize Indian society to an extent where you by which you can make it a very good market, but not to an extent at which Indians will start questioning the Europeans. And Indians will start using the European ideals against the Europeans. Clear? So that delicate balance had to be maintained. So modernizing Indian society and culture was also encouraged by Christian missionaries. Okay, they were religiously minded people. They were here only to expand Christianity. People such as William Wilberforce, Charles Grant, the chairman of Court of Directors of East India Company, etc. They wanted to expand Christianity in India. So they also tried to promote modernization. Why? Because they thought that when the society is modernized, they will start to believe more in Christianity and move away from Hinduism and Islam. Okay, so they also supported the activities of modernism. They opened modern schools, colleges, hospitals, etc., etc. Missionaries also supported the paternalistic imperial policies since they looked upon law and order and British supremacy as essential for religious work. Okay, otherwise you can't intervene easily. Without the help of a strong British force, how can you expect to convert Hindus and Muslims into Christians? Okay, so missionaries also relied on this superior British force for expanding their activity. Policy of modernization was gradually abandoned after 1858. So you know what happened after that. In the 1857 revolt was an eye-opener for the British. They understood that this resentment among the Indians happened because Europeans interfered with the social and religious life of Indians. So after 1857, by the 1858 proclamation, the British people took a stand that they will not interfere in the social and religious life of people of India. Okay, but until then we see progressive measures taken in the Indian society by the Europeans. I mean, there are Indians who work behind this, but it is the law is implemented by the Europeans because they are the rulers. We will study about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, etc. in the upcoming chapter. Okay. Humanitarian measures. So what are the measures taken by Europeans in enhancing the Indian society? Number one, outlawing the practice of sati in 1829 by William Bentinck. Okay, outlawing the practice of sati. We all know that. Ram Mohan Roy and other enlightened Indians and missionaries agitated persistently for the abolition of this monstrous custom, and government agreed to it. Okay, this is a very common knowledge. Anybody who have studied history, at least to some UP classes, will know all about this. Similarly, another social evil that was existing in Indian society at that time was female infanticide. Okay, why was female infanticide prevalent? Because the family cannot afford to pay dowry during the time of her marriage. When a girl is born to a family, when she is of the marriageable age, you have to pay a huge amount of dowry at those times. Okay, and the families who are not able to pay that much of dowry simply kills the child at an infant stage. This is the prime reason behind female infanticide. So this this custom, this monstrous custom, was also regulated or disapproved by law by the Britishers. Okay, so regulations prohibiting infanticide has been passed in 1795 and 1802, but were sternly enforced only by Bentinck and Hardinge. Hardinge also suppressed the practice of making human sacrifices that had prevailed in the primitive tribe of Gonds. The Gond tribe, they practiced this human sacrifice for their tribal beliefs and all, and Hardinge actually managed to bring in laws to strictly prevent this as well. In 1856, Government of India passed an act enabling Hindu widows to remarry, due to the work of none other than Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Okay, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's constant efforts finally bore fruit when Government of India finally passed the act based on which Hindu widows can remarry. Until now, once a widow, till the end of her life, she has to live a life of austerity, away from all kind of festivities, celebrations, etc. Okay, she was to live a life like a saint, clear, away from everything else. So this was very much painful to women who had to undergo that, and so Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and many others together tried to act against it, and finally managed to bring in a law in 1856 against allowing the Hindu women to remarry, Hindu widow to remarry. Then spread of modern education. So in society we are witnessing some changes. So naturally in the field of education also there are some changes that is going to happen. So the government, the Christian missionaries, etc., along with the help of large number of Indian enlightened intelligentsia, played an important part in educating Indians. First step, in 1781, Warren Hastings set up the Calcutta Madrasa for study and teaching of Muslim law, Islamic law. Okay, 1781, who established Calcutta Madrasa? It was Warren Hastings. 1791, Jonathan Duncan started the Sanskrit College at Varanasi. Okay, for the study of Hindu laws and philosophy. So you will think that Britishers are impressed by Muslim laws and Hindu laws. No, they did this for the sole purpose of getting cheap clerks for the company. Okay, they wanted to train Indians as cheap clerks and and use them as cheap clerks in their own company. For that purpose, they put forth these colleges. Okay, they are not at all interested in educating Indians. They wanted cheap clerks for the company, that's all, and they could not afford to bring Europeans all the way from Britain to here because it's very expensive. To find cheap labor, they did this, that's it. Both these institutions were designed to provide regular supply of qualified Indians to help the administration of law in the courts of company. Missionaries believed that modern education would destroy the faith of people in their own religions and lead them to adopt Christianity. So this is why missionaries helped them. Okay, they thought that modern education will make the Indians away from Hinduism and Islam and will embrace Christianity. So they also try to encourage it. But until 1813, we do not see any kind of substantial activity from the European side to enhance Indian education. Even in 1813, what is being done is very little. Okay, according to the Charter Act of 1813, an amount of 1 lakh rupees was earmarked for spending into Indian education. Only 1 lakh rupees, okay, for the entirety of India, in the field of education, only 1 lakh rupees has been earmarked by the Charter Act of 1813. And how was this to be utilized? This was a question. Should this be utilized for enhancing vernacular education? Should this be used for English education only? This was a debate. Okay, so promotion of modern Western studies versus traditional Indian learning. Similarly, what medium of instruction should be used? Should it be English or should it be vernacular? All these were, new questions that need to be addressed. Finally, in 1835, based on Lord Macaulay's famous minutes, it was decided that Oriental learning was completely inferior to European learning, and the method of instruction or the medium of instruction was supposed to be English, and instead of traditional education, Western education was supposed to be given. Okay, based on Macaulay's minute, this was the final decision taken by the government in 1835. There is a very famous controversy between Orientalist and Anglicist. So Orientalists are those people who are in support of vernaculars and traditional education in India, and Anglicists are those people who are in support of English education and Western ideas and all. Okay, so Anglicists in the end won this debate thanks to Lord Macaulay, and their theory was taken. Orientalist learning was completely inferior to European learning or the Anglicist learning. Okay, even the Indian intelligentsia actually advocated for Western knowledge. For example, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, etc., advocated for Western knowledge. Why? They thought that, or they realized that traditional education was completely filled with fear, superstition, authoritarianism, etc. I mean, that was the kind of society in India at that time. Okay, most of the traditional Indian learning or philosophy was based on some ancient textbooks filled with superstition, nothing appealing to reason at all. Okay, I mean, mostly superstitious. Only very little that could apply with logic and all. Okay, so even this educated Indian intelligentsia wanted Western education to happen in India. So they also supported it. So new English schools and colleges were opened in large numbers, but no elementary schools were opening in at a high pace. Okay, plenty of higher education institutions also came, but elementary education was left lagging or neglected. Clear? So the mass education was completely neglected. Britishers believed in a theory known as downward filtration theory. So what is this downward filtration theory? According to this theory, they will educate the upper classes of Indians. Okay, the rich classes of Indians. They will educate the rich classes of Indians. They thought that from these educated Indians, high class Indians, this education will trickle down and will go down to the lower sections also. They do not have to conduct mass education as such. They have to educate only a small group of wealthy people. From them, everything will naturally percolate to the lower stratas. This is what they thought. This is the downward filtration theory. Okay, and this was continued as a practice until 1854, when it was abandoned by the Wood's Dispatch. Wood's Dispatch is the first concrete step taken by Britain in Indian education, and hence it is known as the Magna Carta of Indian education. Wood was actually the president of the Board of Control at that time, and in his dispatch, he repudiated or rejected the downward filtration theory, at least on paper. In Wood's dispatch, focus was given on mass education. Okay, downward filtration theory was repudiated, and the necessity for mass education was upheld. And after this, or based on the Wood's dispatch, departments of education was instituted in all provinces, and affiliating universities were set up in 1857 in Calcutta, Bombay, Madras, etc. Okay, the Calcutta University, Madras University and Bombay University were all set up in 1857 as a result of Wood's dispatch. And Bankim Chandra Chatterjee and J.N. Bose. Okay, J.N. Bose. These two were the first two graduates of Calcutta University. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, the very famous novelist who wrote Anandamath. Okay, Vande Mataram is in that, Anandamath. And then J.N. Bose. These two were the first two graduates of Calcutta University. Okay. No questions. So continuing, this is going to be a lengthier section. So if you are already saturated and if you if you can't continue listening, you can come back and watch the recorded session later. But I will be continuing for a bit more. Okay. In the next class, I have to start with 1857 revolt. So I will be continuing a bit more. If you feel overwhelmed, you can stop it here and come back later. Okay. This recorded session will be available in my channel for a long time. Don't worry. So traditional Indian system of education gradually withered away, and there were more and more official support to the Western system of education. A major weakness of education system was the neglect of mass education. Already I explained this point. Okay, so the literacy rate in India was very much negligible. Okay, very low literary rate. Between 1821 and 1921, the increase in literary rate was almost nothing. That was the condition. Emphasis on English as a medium of instruction was actually a drawback for mass education. So because people do not know English that much. Even now there are people in India who are not comfortable with English. So imagine those times. Okay, plenty of illiterate people. They don't know to converse in English. So then if the medium of instruction is also in English, how can you expect them to be educated? So choosing English as the medium of instruction was a major drawback. And what eventually happened was there was a wide gap between the wealthy people and masses. Why? Because the wealthy people gained education at a high level. The poor people and the lower class people were unable to get that kind of education. So the gap between these two classes widened. Also, education began to become costly. And when it began to become costly, it began to become a monopoly of wealthy class. Okay, so these were the drawbacks of Indian education system. Another huge drawback, the major lacune, was that education of girls was neglected. Nobody cared about it. Why? Because company wanted men to work for the factory or men to work for the company. They don't want women at all. Why? Because men were supposed to do the clerical works, not women. And they were imparting education only for achieving that cheap labor. So they didn't care about women. And in India also, the orthodox factions were against women getting educated. They thought that an educated woman would actually destroy a family. Okay, that kind of stupidity was what the orthodox sections of Indians believed at that time. Okay, companies administration also neglected scientific and technical education. This is another important point. In India, education was given to make that person a laborer in the company. That's it. Scientific and technical education was lagging behind. There were only 3 medical colleges in the whole of the country. One in Calcutta, one in Bombay, and one in Madras. That's it. Similarly, there was only one engineering college good engineering college that was in the country at that time. It was in Roorkee. Okay, and here also only Europeans and Eurasians got educated. Indians were not there. Understood? So the technique in the field of technology and science, still the education was lagging behind. Okay, but in spite of all the many weaknesses of official education policy, the limited spread of modern education led the propagation of modern ideas in India and thus helped in modernization. Despite all this, maybe only a very small group of Indians actually got Western education, but that was enough to ignite the spark in Indian society. Okay, the people who actually got that Western education made sure that they did the best with it. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Swami Vivekanand, all these personalities, will start that social reformation in India, thereby bringing the masses also into. Later on, we will see that masses are also into the national movement. So they will use the Western education against the Westerners itself. Okay, so we will see how all that happened in the chapter 7, that is social and cultural awakening in the first half of 19th century. So I will be taking this chapter also today. I know that already it is too much for most of you. So take a break if you want, and you can watch this chapter at a later stage. Okay, this is actually a small chapter. It won't take more than 30 minutes. So I am continuing with it anyway. Social and cultural awakening in the first half of 19th century. Basically, we are looking into Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Henry Vivian Dorozio. That's it. Okay, these 3 in detail and one slide for all others crammed together. You have to study everybody in detail. You can read that from Spectrum or Biban Chandra Sir's textbook. But in NCERT, 3 people are highlighted. One is Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Then we have Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and finally Henry Vivian Thoreau. Devendranath Tagore also. Okay, so let's start. Ram Mohan Roy. Okay. Ram Mohan Roy, A New Awakening in India, exposed the weakness and decay of Indian society. Okay. So in India, due to the spread of this education, however limited it is, gave that trigger, acted as a trigger for the modern education system. Okay. And impressed in particular by modern science and doctrines of reason and humanism, many people in India, okay, at least that wealthy upper class Indians, started to gain more and more education in the Western methods. Okay, the new social groups began to come up: the capitalist class, working class, modern intelligentsia, etc. They demanded modernization since their own interests demanded it. Okay, capitalists wanted modernization. Why? To gain more and more market for their capitalist goods, or to establish factories and train people to work in these factories. For that, modern education is necessary. Workers wanted modern education. Why? Because in order to get a job in these factories, they need that kind of education. Modern intelligentsia wanted this. Why? Because they understood that Western thoughts India has been stagnant and lagging behind a lot compared to the Western political thoughts, Western reforms, etc., etc. So they also supported modernization. And Ram Mohan Roy was the typical personality in this stage. He is actually the father of Indian social reforms. He is known as the father of Indian Renaissance, Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Okay, so he is rightly regarded as the first great leader of modern India. He had love and respect for the traditional philosophic systems of East, but at the same time, he believed that Western culture also could help to regenerate Indian society. Okay, just because he supported modernization does not mean that he did not like Indian civilization or anything. It's just that he understood, along with Indian civilization, you also need that Western thought and culture to reform or evolve as a society. You can't stick with the degraded ideas such as sati or female infanticide or any of these things, superstitions, beliefs, and all these things. Okay, so he was a very learned scholar, and he knew over a dozen of languages. Okay, he knew plenty of languages such as French, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian. In 1809, he wrote a very famous Persian work known as Gift to Monotheists. He was actually a monotheist, okay, which means he believed that only one God existed. He was against the Hindu belief of polytheism. Okay, according to Hindu customs, we have plenty of gods, right? We have lots. The belief is that we have one God known by different names, but there are, in general, for the people, it is multiple gods. Okay, known by different names and all. So Raja Ram Mohan Roy was not very much entertained by the idea of polytheism. So he was emphasizing on the idea of monotheism. This is what he takes from Islam. In Islam and in Christianity, there is only one God. Okay, in Hinduism we have plenty. So he thought that in India, in general, we should have idea of monotheism rather than polytheism. So for this purpose, explaining his ideologies, his remarks, etc., he wrote a book known as Gift to Monotheists. He settled in Calcutta in 1814 and soon started the Atmiya Sabha. Prelims question: which of the following social reformers established Atmiya Sabha? It was established by Raja Ram Mohan Roy in Calcutta. Okay, year is not that much important, but you will be able to arrange these things chronologically if you remember the year. That's all. Not much important. Okay. He vigorously opposed worship of idols, rigidity of castes, and the prevalence of meaningless religious rituals. He condemned the priestly class for encouraging and inculcating these practices. Obviously, this is very much reasonable. Okay, idolatry, idol worship, rigidity of castes, these kinds of things were criticized from the time of Buddha. Okay, Buddha, Mahavira, all these people also criticized all these things. But unfortunately, nothing changed much. So here, Raja Ram Mohan Roy was also against the idea of worshipping idols, rigidity of caste, stupid rituals, etc., etc. He published the Bengali translation of Vedas and of 5 of the principal Upanishads to prove his point. Okay, he translated Vedas and Upanishads into Bengali, And in his work, he pointed out that in Vedas and Upanishads, nowhere it says about certain things that are in practice in Hindu religion as of that day. Okay, plenty of things are not actually mentioned in these sacred textbooks. It all evolved as a part of custom later on because of the Brahmanical dominance and all these things that happened in early times. Okay, so as a proof of all that, he showed Vedas and translations of Vedas and Upanishads. He also wrote a series of tracts and pamphlets in defense of monotheism. Okay, Ram Mohan Roy relied ultimately on the power of human reason, which was in his view the final touchstone of the truth of any doctrine, Eastern or Western. So it doesn't matter what kind of culture you want to pursue. You can continue with the Western thing or Eastern thing, whatever, doesn't matter. But the cornerstone of all these things should be reason and logic. No blind acceptance of anything. Whatever it is, sacred or divine or whatever, question it. Okay, question it, and if it applies to your logic, take it. Otherwise, leave it. So he made the ultimate power of human reason as the final touchstone of his doctrine towards Eastern or Western culture. Okay, in 1820, he published his Precepts of Jesus, another book published by Ram Mohan Roy, that is Precepts of Jesus. Okay, here he looked into the Christianity and its aspects, its positives, negatives, etc., etc. And he wanted some of the moral messages of Christianity, of Christ, to be imparted into the Hinduism, incorporated into Hinduism. Although initially the Christian missionaries were happy of Indian intelligentsia, this is the point where they departed. Okay, they thought that the Indian intelligentsia will actually convert to Christianity once they study about all these things. But what happened was, people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, rather than converting into Christianity, he tried to take the good things from Christianity and incorporate it into Hinduism. Okay, so this actually earned the anger or hostility from missionaries. Stood for the reform of Hinduism and opposed its suppression by Christianity. Okay, so it went contradictory to what the missionaries thought. Okay, rather than converting to Christianity, he actually stood for Hinduism. He upheld Hinduism with reforms, with good reforms which is taken from Christianity, Islam and other religions. Okay, so in 1829 he founded a new religious society which is known as Brahma Sabha, and this society is eventually known as Brahmo Samaj. This is the very famous society established by Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Whenever we speak about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, we always speak about this one, Brahma Sabha. Okay, this Brahma Sabha is actually eventually came to be known as Brahmo Samaj. The idea was to purify Hinduism and to preach theism, or the worship of one god, monotheism. Okay, so the new society was to be based on twin pillars of reason and the Vedas and Upanishads. Vedas and Upanishads should be followed, but with the cornerstone of reasoning. No acceptance based on blind faith. Okay, so he attacked polygamy and the degraded state at which the widows were often reduced. Okay, polygamy means a man having more than one wife. That is polygamy. So this system was heavily criticized by Ram Mohan Roy, and he also wanted to, bring up the position of widows in the society. Raise the status of women. He demanded that they be given the right for inheritance and property. Okay, until then Hindu women did not have the right to inherit property. In Christianity it was there, but in Hinduism it was not there. So Ram Mohan Roy put his efforts into implementing that as well. In 1817, a very famous personality named as David Hare founded the very famous Hindu College, and Ram Mohan Roy gave most enthusiastic assistance to Hare in this and other educational projects. The Hindu College was established to study the Hindu culture and all, but with reason and with logic and everything. Okay, so Ram Mohan Roy also wholeheartedly supported David Hare in such educational projects. In 1825, he established the Vedanta College, in which courses both in Indian learning and in Western social and physical sciences were offered. So who established Vedanta College? It is also by Ram Mohan Roy. Okay, Vedanta College, Brahma Sabha, all these are Atmiya Sabha, all these are established by Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Okay, who gave Ram Mohan Roy the title of Raja? Who gave the title? Anyone? If anybody know the answer to that question, please put it in the comment section. Otherwise, I will explain it I will give you the answer at the end of this session. Okay, who gave the title Raja to Ram Mohan Roy. Okay, continuing. So Ram Mohan Roy also compiled a Bengali grammar. Okay, he was a very educated personality and who was versatile in plenty of languages, and he actually compiled a Bengali grammar. He opposed the rigidities of caste system. Ram Mohan Roy was a pioneer of Indian journalism, initiator of public agitation on political questions in the country. Okay, condemned the oppressive practice of Bengali zamindars, raised the demands for Indianization of superior services, separation of executive and the judiciary, trial by jury, and the judicial equality between Indians and Europeans. So all these things. Later we will see that some of these things are actually put forth by Indian National Congress as well. The moderate leaders of Indian National Congress also put forth certain these kinds of demands in front of the British. Okay, Ram Mohan Roy had already put these demands earlier itself. Ram Mohan Roy was a firm believer in internationalism and in free cooperation between nations. Okay, he was not a perverted nationalist or anything. He was an internationalist and he wanted good free cooperation between nations. He celebrated the success of revolution of Spanish America in 1823 by giving a public dinner. Okay, he was very happy what happened to the revolution in Spanish America, and he celebrated its success by giving a public dinner in 1823. Okay, which means he was very well connected with whatever is going on in the world around us. Unlike everything that else was happening in India until that time. Until that time, Indian rulers had no idea of what is going on elsewhere in the world. This is why India lagged behind a lot in the medieval period. But here, by the rise of Indian intelligentsia in the 19th century, we see that these people are very well connected to the Western and other parts of the globe. In the field of education, he was greatly helped by Dutch watchmaker David Hare and Scottish missionary Alexander Duff. Okay, these are merely points I have put it in the slide so that you can study for prelims. Okay, these names are very important: David Hare, Alexander Duff, etc. That's the only reason I included in this slide for your prelims perspective. Dwaraknath Tagore was one of the foremost Indian associates. We will study about this person in detail. Okay. Other prominent followers included Prasanna Kumar Tagore, Chandrasekhar Dab, Tarachand Chakravarti, etc. etc. Tarachand Chakravarti was the first secretary of Brahma Sabha as well. Okay, I will probably ask this question in one of my MCQ sessions, so remember this one. Okay, Tarachand Chakravarti was the first secretary of Brahma Sabha, later became Brahma Samaj. Okay, now we are going to see the other one, Derozio and the Young Bengal movement. So yes, Satya, very good. The correct answer. The title Raja was granted to Ram Mohan Roy by none other than Akbar II. Okay, Akbar II. Correct answer. Very good. So Derozio and Young Bengal movement. Okay, only a few more slides. Within 15 minutes, we will wind this up. Okay, Derozio and Young Bengal movement. So this movement, named as the Young Bengal movement, was actually initiated by somebody known as Henry Vivian Derozio, who was an Anglo-Indian. At a very young age itself, he achieved a lot in his life. Okay, he actually was born in 1809, and he taught at the Hindu college. Okay, he also was inspired by the French Revolution and free thinking, etc., etc. He actually, while teaching in the Hindu college, inspired his students to think rationally and freely, to question all authority, to love liberty, equality, etc., etc. And he taught them to worship truth. Okay, a very liberal, very progressive personality. Okay, Derozio was perhaps the first nationalist poet of modern India. And a prelims question: perhaps the first nationalist modern poet of India, because he wrote plenty of poems back at those times, and in a nationalistic spirit. Okay, regarding liberty, etc., and the modern ideals and all. So he is probably considered as the first nationalist poet of modern India. Okay, he was actually removed from Hindu college in 1831 because of his radicalism and died of cholera soon after at the age of 22. Okay, his concepts, his ideals were too much progressive for his times. Okay, I mean way too progressive, even more than Ram Mohan Roy and all. So if he was born in 21st century today, then his concept is very much acceptable for the society. Okay, but at those times in 1800s, it was way too progressive. He had very less support from the society. He was not able to make it into a mass movement because most of the society was still very much orthodox and outrightly neglected him. He was even thrown out of the college for preaching those kinds of progressive views. Okay, and he died at the very young age of 22 by cholera. So he was a professor in a college even at a younger age than that. So you can imagine his level of what kind of personality he was. Okay, he attacked old customs, rites, traditions, etc. He was passionate advocates of the Young Bengal movement. Okay, Young Bengal movement is started by him and his students. Okay, his students were inspired by him for conducting such a movement, for attacking the old customs, rights, etc. They were passionate advocates of women's rights and demanded education for them. So at those times, giving women education was something completely absurd. Okay, I mean, they couldn't even think about it. Actually, there was a belief that if the woman is educated, she would make her husband a slave for in the family. Okay, that kind of blunders or stupidities were actually believed by the so-called orthodox Indian people at that time. Okay, and Derozio, Ram Mohan Roy all started to attack these kinds of stupid beliefs. They did not succeed in creating a mass movement. So this is the drawback of the Derozio movement, the Young Bengal movement. That is, they did not create a mass movement. They failed in taking up the peasant cause as well. Okay, they had a very small social base. They couldn't create a movement at all, and they also failed to take the peasant cause. If they had taken up the peasant cause, then they could have gathered a wider social base. Problem was that even the peasants were not ready to join them. Why? Because their concepts on other sections of the or on other areas of social life was way too progressive even for the peasants. Okay, even though if the peasants joined them, they could have benefited from it, they were still not willing to join the Derosians because even they couldn't accept their kind of ideals. Too progressive for 1800s. Okay, now Devendranath Tagore and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Devendranath Tagore in 1839 founded the Tattva Bodhini Sabha to propagate Ram Mohan Roy's ideals. Okay, Tattva Bodhini Sabha 1839 by Devendranath Tagore, who is the father of Rabindranath Tagore. Okay, so Tattva Bodhini Sabha and its organ Tattva Bodhini Patrika promoted a systematic study of Indian past in Bengali language. Important, easy to remember. Rabindranath Tagore is a Bengali, his father is also a Bengali. So any publication brought out is also in Bengali. Okay, so Tattva Bodhini Patrika was brought out in Bengali, which promoted systematic study of India's past. In 1843, Devendranath Tagore reorganized Brahma Samaj. After the death of Ram Mohan Roy, Devendranath Tagore was the next person to reorganize this society and continue with its activities. Okay, and he put new life into the society. Supported the movement for widow remarriage, abolition of polygamy, women's education, improvement of the rights condition and temperance, etc., etc. So overall, similar social causes were put forth by Devendranath Tagore and the Brahmo Samaj. Another important personality was Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Do look into this personality in detail. Okay, because last year only I think there were some clashes in Bengal, and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's idol was vandalized by some miscreants and all. Okay, so it was all over the news regarding Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. So we can expect a question on him, if not in prelims, in mains for sure. Okay, so do look into that. So as far as NCERT is concerned, this is what is given. So he rose in 1851 to a position of the principalship of the Sanskrit College. Okay, he actually was from a very humble family, but by 1851 he rose to the position of the principal of Sanskrit College. Though he was a great Sanskrit College, his mind was open to the best Western educated thought, and he came to represent a happy blend of Indian and Western culture. Just like Ram Mohan Roy, etc., he was very much welcoming of the Western thought. Okay, by welcoming Western thought, that doesn't mean he was against Indian culture or anything. He was a Sanskrit scholar. Okay, so he appreciated Indian culture, but at the same time, he too wanted Western ideals to have effect on India's rigid society or say stagnant society. Okay, he actually wrote a Bengali primer. So what is a primer? Primer is the basic textbook of a language. Okay, for example, a book that contains the alphabets or the basic grammar, etc., can be called as a primer. So Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar actually wrote the Bengali primer, which is still used even today. Okay, which is still used even today. He opened the gates of Sanskrit College to non-Brahmin students as well. Okay, until then, the Sanskrit College was exclusively dominated by Brahmins, and he did not like the idea of Sanskrit being a Brahminical language as such. So he opened the gates to non-Brahmins as well. Anyone can come and study. Okay, long struggles in favor of widow remarriage. So it is actually Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's effort to legalize widow remarriage, which eventually became a law. Okay, so Rajaram Mohan Roy is the person behind abolishing sati, and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar is the person who is behind legalizing widow remarriage for Hindus. The first lawful Hindu widow remarriage among the upper caste in our country was celebrated in Calcutta on 7th of December 1856 under the inspiration of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. It was only in 7th December 1856 that a legalized widow remarriage happened in India under the law. By that time, a law was established for this purpose. You have to understand that despite this law being in operation, it was not very much practiced. Okay, still the number of widow remarriages that happened was negligible. So theoretically, he won the battle, but in practicality, India was still lagging behind a huge way. Okay, widows were still living a very miserable life for a very long time before anything substantial happens in the conditions of widows. In 1850, Vidyasagar protested against child marriage. All his life he campaigned against polygamy. This is similar to other social reformers of the 19th century. He was so deeply interested in the education of women. As a government inspector of schools, he organized 35 girls' schools. Okay, he was actually a government inspector for schools, and he organized 35 girls' schools, all from his own money, not from the government's money. Okay, so he was very much enthusiastic about female education. A secretary to Bethune School, he was one of the pioneers of higher education for women. Okay, Bethune School was founded in Calcutta in 1849, and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar was a secretary to that school. And he was one of the pioneers of higher education of women as well. The first step to modern education to girls was taken by the missionaries in 1821, but these efforts were marred by the emphasis of Christian religious education. Okay, the first step to educate girls were not actually taken by Indians at all. It was taken by the Christian missionaries. The only problem with that is that rather than giving a secular education, this was more to influence them into Christianity. Okay, the kind of education provided was more or less secular, but the ultimate objective of that education was to convert that person to Christianity. That was the drawback at that time. Okay. Now, the last slide for the day, pioneers of reform in Western India. Okay, this is the final slide, and we have come to the end of this very long session. And from next class onwards, we will start something more interesting, that 1857 revolt, the moderates, International Congress, Gandhiji and all. So that part is much more interesting and faster or high-paced areas compared to pre-1857 Indian history. Okay, so so this is the last slide from pre-1857 India, pioneers of reform in Western India. So we studied about some social reformers such as Rajaram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Devendranath Tagore, Derozio, etc. So there are some other reformers also. Okay, that is what we are going to see in this slide. In 1849, Paramahamsa Mandali was founded in Maharashtra. Okay, Paramahamsa Mandali was founded in Maharashtra, which was another important organization which believed in one God. Okay, monotheism was primary to Paramahamsa Mandali, and were primarily interested in breaking the caste rules. At their meetings, members took food cooked by low caste people. Okay, until then, yesterday we studied inter dining was very much restricted in those times. But Paramahamsa Mandali worked against it. Okay, they encouraged inter dining between various castes, etc. etc. In 1848, several educated young men formed the Students' Literary and Scientific Society, which had two branches, the Gujarati and the Marathi Dhyan Prasarak Mandalis. Okay, 1848, Students' Literary and Scientific Society, having Gujarati and Marathi branches of Dhyan Prasarak Mandalis. Okay, these are for prelims point of view. I am giving it to you as points. Okay, 1851, Jyotiba Phule and his wife Savitri Bhai Phule. Okay, his wife's name is Savitri Bhai Phule. So she, along with Jyotiba Phule, started girls' school in Pune. Okay, they worked for education of girls and various other social causes. Okay, Phule was also a pioneer of widow remarriage movement in Maharashtra. Campaign against upper class domination and Brahmanical supremacy also was taken up by Phule. Phule belonged to Mali family. Okay, so he knew the state of lower caste in India, and so he worked to make their position better in the Indian society. Vishnu Shastri Pandit founded the Widow Remarriage Association in 1850s. So who founded Widow Remarriage Association? And in the options, if there is Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, there is a very good chance that many people will go for that. Okay, because he is the person who brought in the law for widow remarriage. But it is actually Vishnu Shastri Pandit who founded this organization. Another important personality is Karson Das Mulji, who started the Satya Prakash journal in Gujarati in 1852, advocating widow remarriage. Karson Das Mulji. Gopal Hari Deshmukh, also known as Lok Hitavadi, he advocated the reorganization of Indian society on rational principles of modern humanistic and secular values. Okay, another important social reformer, G.H. Deshmukh, Gopal Hari Deshmukh, also known by the name Lok Hitavadi, advocated for the reorganization of Indian society in the rationalistic modern principles. Finally, Dadabhai Naoroji, the grand old man of India, Dadabhai Naoroji, whom we will see in later chapters, especially dealing with Indian National Movement and Indian National Congress sessions, important sessions of Indian National Congress. We will study a lot about him regarding East India Association, etc., regarding Rashtra Goftar, so and so. But for now, let's look into a very small aspect of his life. He started the association to reform the Zoroastrian religion and the Parsi Law Association, which agitated for the grant of a legal status to women and for uniform laws of inheritance and marriage for the Parsis. So he was a Parsi by religion. So he tried to reform the Parsi religion, the Zoroastrian religion, and also agitated for the grant of legal status to women. Okay, even now, the Parsi community is a community in which women are given very good level of education compared to other communities. Okay, so Dadabhai Naoroji was one of the pioneers of reforming this religion and to bring in legal status to women and for applying uniform laws of inheritance and marriage for the Parsis. So it's not just these people. Okay, there are plenty of others also who are associated with reforms in India. You can read about them in Spectrum textbook. If I have time, I will take that textbook. But prelims is pretty much close, so I don't know if that is possible. Anyway, do one thing, read this corresponding areas in the textbook. Okay, that is very important. Once you listen to my class, you can use this as your notes for studying because most of the points in textbook are in the PDF, the slides itself. But it is important that you read the textbook at least once, the corresponding chapters. Okay, I take like 2-3 chapters every day, and the next class is only after 2-3 days. Okay, so you have ample time to read it. So read those portions at least once. Okay, from your NCERT textbook. So that is it. We have come to the end of this session. Tomorrow there is a 1-hour session. I am planning it to conduct it at 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. I am not sure. Sometimes it will be 5 to 6 only as usual. But let's see. I will announce it in the group very soon. Tonight itself I will announce it in the group. And tomorrow we are going to look into the MCQs of August and September 2020. 25 MCQs, 1 hour as the usual quizzes. You know that. Okay, so come prepared for that as well. Read the current affairs portions from August and September 2020. Okay. Okay, let me see your questions. Basis of on which Atmiya Sabha was formed and Brahmo Samaj was formed was for different purposes, or Brahmo Samaj was just changed in name? No. Atmiya Sabha and Brahmo Samaj are entirely different organizations. Okay. Both of them were looking into social reforms. Okay. In that manner, they are similar. But Brahmo Samaj is different. Brahmo Sabha and Brahmo Samaj are same. Brahmo Sabha was the initial organization, later renamed as Brahmo Samaj. Atmiya Sabha was an entirely different organization. Both of them founded by Rajaram Mohan Roy. Both of them looking into social reforms and all, but different organizations. Okay, Atmiya Sabha different, Brahma Samaj and Brahma Sabha same. Okay, so that is it. We have come to the end of this session. If you have any further queries, you can always message me in the Telegram or my WhatsApp number. It is given in the Telegram channel t.me/msrw. I will reply to your questions in within 1 to 2 hours. Okay, you already know that. So if you haven't already liked and subscribed to this channel, please do so. Please also give the comments in YouTube in the public comment section so that more people can look into my channel and learn from it if they want. Okay, so that is it. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you Satya for staying all this way till the end of the class. See you in the next session. Until then, bye bye.